typically.
Call the meeting to order. Let's salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ellie, could you please read the certification of compliance?
The time, date, location of this meeting was published in the Asbury Park Press and posted on the bulletin board in the office of the Township of Lakewood at least 48 hours in advance. The public has the right to attend this meeting, and reasonable, comprehensive minutes of this meeting will be available for public inspection. This meeting meets the criteria of the Open Public Meetings Act.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Grunberger. Mr. Franklin.
Here.
Mr. Hibberson.
Yes.
Mr. Flansbaum.
Here my shirt sleeves.
Mr. Herzl.
Here.
Mr. Renner. Mr. Coleman. Mrs. Zagrafos. Mr. Garfield.
I'd like to welcome back Mr. Everson in the hospital. We're all very thankful that he's well and he's going to participate there. We miss you. Yes.
Chairman, just so that the public as well as the board is aware, the town has gone to live streaming the current committee and planning and zoning board meetings. There is a camera in the back of the room that is set to switch on at specific times based upon the scheduling of the IT administrator here. So we are live on the township website. There is a link right on the home page of the township page that shows that.
The one that you have a jacket.
All right. And there is an archive, so it will be preserved in perpetuity for you as well.
Oh, great.
Yeah, Ali, confirmation of the recording status.
Yes, the recording
Which one?
is on.
Both.
Both.
Both of us?
Okay.
Okay, swearing in professionals.
State your full name for record, please.
Harrisburg.
Do you swear affirm the testimony you give this evening will be the truth and the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Normalization resolutions. And just please take the vote on it.
Yes, SB 2172 is this one that was remanded by a judge for approval. I believe Mr. Garfield, who is not familiar with the case, is the only one who can't vote on that one.
I don't think you can vote on any of the resolutions. I don't think you will.
I recuse myself on that one. I'm not going to vote on it.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a motion to approve it? Okay, it's moved.
If you need a second, I'll second.
You're the only one.
I'll second by order of the judge.
Okay.
All in favor, by order of the judge?
Not vote.
I'll vote yes because the judge said I had to.
Okay.
SD 2266, minor subdivision, Mr. Flansbaum and Mr. Garfield cannot vote.
Motion? Second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, nays, no.
Mr. Flansbaum, you're off on the rest of the resolutions, as is Mr. Garfield. This is SD 2272, Congregation Talmud Torah. Everyone else can vote.
Motion?
Second.
Second, motion second, all in favor? Aye.
SB
No.
SB 2227 for Yarrow, major site plan. Ms. Zagrafos was not at that meeting or abstained from that movement, so she can't vote on this one.
Motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And SB 2109 was an extension of a site plan. Everyone can vote besides Mr. Garfield and Mr. Flansbaum.
Motion?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Let the record reflect that Mrs. Zagrafos is here.
We don't straight to what's the first one?
There's a correspondence request from KBA Engineers about the addition of a mezzanine to an improved office building for SB 2208. We'd like to take that first. We have a number of applications that are carrying tonight. Would you like to make
I'll
those
do by number
announcements?
6.
Excuse me?
Okay, just wait one second.
Sure.
Any changes to the agenda?
Yes. Number 7, application ST 2142 for Congregation Cole Arie. These applicants owe escrow on a different project, and they have owed since April. I told them we wouldn't be hearing this tonight until they can settle that, and unless there's anyone here to fight that, I would recommend we announce that to the October 3rd public hearing. Other changes for the October 3rd public hearing would be number 11, SD 2282. They are reviewing some issues with another property owner and the streets in that area. I would also recommend October 3rd. And then the other ones marked to carry are already in italics on the agenda as numbers 13, 14, 15, 16. Number 13, SP 2242, Congregation Yeshiva Nicole Kine. They've requested to carry to a future meeting date. I'm recommending October 3rd.
Will we notice or no?
No.
We'll announce.
Actually, I can clarify on that. No, they carried by choice. SP 2247AA for Yeshiva Stolen Carlin. Adequate legal notice was not provided, so they forgot to notice neighboring Jackson residents, so I advise that we would announce a carry to October 3rd, but they do have additional mail notices that they will be sending. SD 2281 Avenue of the States. Adequate legal notice was not provided. They missed putting the notice in the paper, though they did provide the mail notices, so they are providing the notice in the paper, but we will also announce that carry. And the last one, SD 2271 MR Lever Realty has formally withdrawn the application and will not be heard. So I would recommend that with the board's consent, we announce a carry for items number 7, 11, 13, 14, and 15 to October 3rd.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that item 9 is being carried as well.
Latin American Pentecostal Church?
No, Congregation Yeshiva Markor Khan.
Yes, that's number 13 on the latest version
Oh,
of the
okay,
agenda.
I have
It
the
was
old one.
updated this morning and it was available
Thank
here
you.
if you need it. Yep.
We need a motion on that?
Typically, John says that it's an administrative matter, but
And you can just, all in favor, all opposed?
Yes, second. All in favor? Aye.
Those opposed? No opposed, all in favor? I'll make the announcement. So this is 7, 11, 13, and 14 and 15.
correct,
Okay.
Members,
Members,
this total will be taken off.
correct.
I'm going to read them individually. Members of the public, number 7 on tonight's calendar, Congregation Cole Raya has been adjourned. We heard on October 3rd, 2017, 6 o'clock this meeting, will no further notice. Number 11 on tonight's calendar, SD 2282 Alfred Street Holdings has been adjourned. Will be heard on October 3rd, 2017, 6 o'clock this meeting, will be no further notice. Number 13 on tonight's calendar, Congregation Yeshiva Microphone has been adjourned. Will be heard on October 3rd, 2017, 6 o'clock this meeting, hall. There will be no further notices. Number 14 and 15 will not be heard tonight. There was inadequate notice. That is Yeshiva Stolen Carlin and Avenue of the States LLC. Both of those matters will be renoticed, but if you're here, the new date will be October 3rd, 2017, before there will be hearing those tonight. And number 16, MR Lever Realty, that matter was withdrawn, so of course that will be hearing tonight.
We'll have to renotice.
It was withdrawn, they would have to provide an entire new application, as I understand it, Mr. Jackson.
Right, they resubmit their application, and they'll have to provide it. And so there's a notice process, a review process, everything.
Okay, and I assume you can, Mr. Bashir.
Yes. I'm here on SP 2208, which was Lakeside Holdings, an application the board approved a number of months ago. We're in the process of residence compliance. It's an office building, an addition of an office building to an existing site. It's the existing site southeast of the intersection of Airport Road and the Garden State Parkway entrance. We're adding one additional building to that. During the process of the application, we had submitted architectural plans, and as a result of residence compliance, Terry's office, in an abundance of caution, did identify that we're showing a mezzanine in the building now, which added 1,963 square feet. That building, as we proposed, it was 16,060 square feet. So a slight increase. We were much in excess of parking. 132.6 stalls were required, 149 were provided. With the addition of the mezzanine, we are still compliant. We need 139 under the ordinance and 149 proposed. So we are still 10 stalls in excess of the parking demand at the time of that application. But in abundance of caution, it didn't specifically note that there was a mezzanine, so we come here to request that you allow us to install that mezzanine. No new variance is created.
What is the mezzanine? What's the purpose?
It's the second-story offices have small, little 300 square foot offices. The intent is really, it's the boss's office up on the third floor.
It's not the 300 square feet in total?
300 square feet on 3 or 4 different offices upstairs, so a total of 1963 square feet.
It wasn't on the original application.
It wasn't on the original architecturals, that's correct.
That's, as a percentage, how much more is that?
As a percentage in that building, I would say it's about 14%, 13%.
That's a pretty significant change in your square footage.
It is a 13% increase, and as I'm testifying, we're not changing the footprint. The look of the building isn't changing. It's a mezzanine in there. We are compliant with the parking ordinance, so we don't create any new variances or anything. Because as an abundance of caution, Terry picked up that there was a mezzanine we didn't show before, so he wanted to make sure that the board was aware.
With the original board approval, and we wanted them to come back to the board and make sure that you were comfortable with the mezzanine being added. If you act favorably, the application is still in compliance review. So we would look at all the other site design aspects of the application to make sure that what they are showing on the plans is going to be adequate to support the building and the mezzanine. The question is, based on what the board's hearing, is it consistent with the original approval from your recollection?
So, let me ask this, if you had built a building 5 years go by, and you go to the zoning officer and you say, we want to add a mezzanine on, and it's going to add, would you say 1,300 square feet?
1900 square feet.
1,900 square feet, what would the zoning officer say?
I believe it would be permitted without, it would be permitted administratively, as it doesn't create any variances and wouldn't be considered a major site plan as sufficient parking was provided.
Is that correct, Alan? You know, if they go, you don't know, Terry, you know?
We're not the zoning officer.
I'm just by comparison, that's pretty significant.
Sounds a lot.
That's a lot.
But and I should note, it's 30% of that building, but this entire site has 40,000 square feet, so it's multiple buildings on the site.
Joe, what is your building coverage with the mezzanine?
It does not change at all. Building coverage remains exactly the same, 15.39%, where 40% is permitted.
So you're not asking for an increase in the size of the building from what the board approved?
Correct.
As a clarification, that part of that building, now that we have the most recent architectural documents, is now a mezzanine.
That is correct.
What is the function of the mezzanine? Is it a pass-through?
No, it's actually access from the floor below. A stairwell goes up
But
to...
it's access, it's not floor space, it's not retail? it's not-
No, it's up above the second floor with access from in the interior of someone's office.
So you could make a case that that's 1,900 square feet less of building that's not contributing towards parking demand, as opposed to an office, as opposed to...
Correct. It will be used as office space. It is an office up there. And again, that's why we're including it in our parking calcs, but we are still compliant with parking.
Can you show us what it looks like on a board or something?
We did submit architectural plans.
There
I
are
do.
architectural plans for the board on the top of your plan stack there.
To the chairman. I feel like when we get this type of correspondence, I'd like to review the minutes and the prior resolution, because I can't remember, sometimes we're not getting here any of our details, and I think when we're looking at a team, it's important, whatever you memorize about the discussions and the public comment, I think all that really is. So I just wanted to share that. I don't know if we could consider doing that for the future when we have correspondence.
We do. And this is a major change. It's not just you're adding 142 feet. It's adding 2,000 feet. It's a 30%, 40%. I think this is a change which we should know what was approved. But I think the shooter's argument is that the mezzanines, they have sufficient parking even when adding the extra 2,000 square feet.
Correct.
We're not asking for any variance.
We're not asking for any additional variances. If you look at sheet 3 of the architectural plans, I have multiple copies. I believe you have copies.
And the footprint of the building is not changing.
Footprint will not change.
So from a site perspective, it doesn't sound like it's changing the site improvements per se. And like I said, you can almost make a case that a mezzanine is not going to be used for something that would generate parking.
And even if it does.
And even if it did, it's still compliant.
Yes, it-
He says it's not just an open area, it's an office.
It's it's open to below. It's a mezzanine. There'll be a half wall that you can see downstairs.
What will you do, put cubicles in there, is that people?
We have the architecturals here. Honestly, it's pretty small for cubicles. One of them is 370 square feet, one of them is 500 square feet. So there's not gonna be multiple cubicles, it's gonna be the boss's office.
But
One
the board
office.
should be comfortable with what's in front of them.
I don't understand.
Would there be a problem, Joe, if you came back to October 3rd and you had a chance to look at this?
I don't have an issue with that, if the board would like us to come back. I think it's a pretty de minimis change, and we're not creating any variances. We have the parking. As I s-
You're actually adding 5 individual offices.
Correct. Correct.
To what point is it 13% is still?
I would say it's de minimis if we have the parking demand. If obviously, if we're creating a parking variance, we're back here for a whole new site plan. Certainly understand that. In this case, we had ample parking, we were well over parked.
Realistically, the board feels that it's a fairly large change to the approval, that an amended approval would be warranted. If this much, research is required for the board to make a fair determination, perhaps correspondence isn't appropriate for this request.
Was this space included on the original application?
We did not include it on the original application. Our architectural plans didn't show the mezzanine area. It's not that they didn't, not that we didn't intend it, we only had floor plans for the first and second floor.
So you're adding on to the building?
We're showing additional square footage in the mezzanine.
Mr. Jackson, what's your recommendation?
I'm just taken back by the 1,900 square feet. I don't know what the conditions were. He says he's close on parking, or our engineer hasn't reviewed it. I don't know. If it's all internal to the building, I get it. That's why I asked if the zoning officer would approve this if it was already there. I don't know if there's an exemption that lets you add a, deck over where there was open ceiling. That's what you're doing, right?
Is what
To some extent, yeah.
But I agree. I think this should be scrutinized by our engineer, and we should get a packet. And I don't know if, it's a major site plan change. I'd like it to be scrutinized.
I believe you have in the architecturals also the resolution compliance review by the engineer detailing these plans and the recommendation to come back to the board. So I don't know that there would be any additional review to do.
Well, prior to going to the site plan, which ultimately, if the board is not comfortable with what they're hearing, that would be a way to go. You may want to consider coming back to the next meeting and have a chance at what Angela recommended, which was looking at the resolution, look at the original approval, and based upon the original approval, what's changing and are you not comfortable? I would recommend that step first, and if you can't rectify it at that step, then we may look at an amended plan. That's probably the best way to handle this.
I would like to know from the zoning officer if there's any kind of exemption for under a certain amount of square feet, you can do an addition or add more space or make an amendment. A lot of towns do have latitude for a small.
Interior renovations, they don't typically.
It's all interior, but when you add another floor,
What's your opinion?
Bring it back, put the interior in the back, and check it
You don't feel comfortable voting on it? You don't feel comfortable voting on it right now?
Joe,
What-
can you provide a one-page rider explaining what's changing versus what's approved?
Certainly.
Make that part happen.
We can provide that information to your engineer, come back for the next meeting, and review it again at correspondence. We have no objection to that.
The motion on,
some correspondence, you're not going to act. That appears to be the consensus of the board. All in favor of passing on this application? Record reflects it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, so we go on to number one. Now, is number one, Al, is number one and number two together? One?
We heard them somewhat separately with separate actions last time. I'm not sure what the applicant's intention is. This is application SD 2208 for Prospect Street Holdings. and SB 2231. You will recall SB 2208, we had a motion for approval that did not pass at the last meeting, followed by a motion to retain jurisdiction by Ms. Zagrafos. The site plan portion of this project had not received any motions at all at this point.
Mr. Jackson, any input?
I thought some of the discussion was you want to see the site plan first on the shul. I don't think we had any discussion about the shul last time.
No discussion on this one.
Strictly about the subdivision. And if, my recollection is that the testimony was that this was a fully conforming application for the subdivision.
And I believe that someone had indicated that they wanted input from the township committee somewhat. And I know Mr. Liston had written a letter to Steve Seacare on behalf of the township committee, and he has provided a response, which I think confirms everything that we had indicated. But we will go through all of our testimony. We would like to, again, hear, as I requested at the original hearing, like to hear each of the applications individually, as they are two separate applications. If you want to hold off on the vote, I understand that, to vote on them together, but we would like to at least put our proofs on individually, as they're individual cases.
Practically speaking, I think the board has to act on the subdivision first because you don't have a lot.
Correct. You don't get to the site plan,
Subdivisions first.
you don't get to the second application for the site plan until, well, all I'm saying is, I'd like to at least put all my proofs on for the subdivision. If they want to hold off to vote to hear the second one, I still, I understand why, but I would like to at least have the applications. I don't want them merging together, as that's where some of the confusion, I think, happened last meeting.
May I just have an opportunity to address the board with regard to the letter I wrote and the response I got from Mr. Seacare?
I would like to put our application on.
I would like to respond to counsel who raised something outside the application.
I didn't raise anything.
Did write a letter to the committee, basically asking what the status of the escrows were and various conditions.
Do we have that, the letter?
Yes, it was copied to the board.
I got a copy. It's an unusual circumstance. As I indicated, it's a different entity, it's a different piece of property, but I know the board was uncomfortable, and that was certainly part of the big picture, and I think the board should certainly hear what Mr. Liston has to say.
Excuse me.
At this point, or after I put our proofs on.
So that's up to the chairman. I mean,
Well,
if he wants to hear it now or later, he can take the order as he sees fit.
the issue was raised by Mr. Pfeffer.
The reason why I say that is that I think before we muddy the waters with a lot of other information, I think it's prudent to hear the application from this single applicant. The letter deals with other applications that are other entities that really are unrelated.
Can I just ask Mr. Liston, would it be okay to wait until he puts his case in, then you can...
I don't think it would be fair to the objectors, simply because Mr. Pfeffer raised the issue and said that Mr. Seacare answered and said everything's fine, and that's not the truth. That's not the fact.
I think you said Mr. Seeger did not answer.
He indicated, Mr. Pfeffer?
Mr. Herzl, I think if we don't hear it now, we're going to hear 10 minutes of why we should hear it now.
And then my point, we're going to hear it again.
Mr. Pfeffer, what you're saying, but I've seen this movie and I know how it ends. So let's just hear it.
The sequels were never as good.
Mr. Liston.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you know, I represent 41 residents of this neighborhood. It is being developed essentially by the same developer, although using different entities. This entity that's before you tonight was bound by a formal resolution, which I discussed in my letter, which required that the property that is being used for the subdivision and the shul, in my view, be used only for the shul, which would have presented enough parking. In addition to that, there were requirements in the township's developers agreement and in the resolution and the minutes supporting the resolution of the earlier approval, which required several things. One, that there be a $10,000 per unit escrow for every CO. I spoke to the former attorney for the applicant, who was here earlier this evening, and she indicated to me that she's been collecting the escrows, but she doesn't know how much she has, and she'll let me know after the holiday actually what COs it covers and what it doesn't cover. That's one problem. The second problem that was not answered by Mr. Seacare has to do with paragraph 2.9B of the developer's agreement. I'm sorry, it has to do with the requirement that there be a bond posted after 25 COs are issued on the former development to guarantee that the shul and the park would both be built. That's a full performance bond. Mr. Seacare did not address that. I don't believe any bond has been provided. I don't think there's any proof before this board or the township yet that it's been bonded for. So under the circumstances, I think, as I indicated at the last meeting, there are problems with this application and the subdivision application because I think it was contemplated by the earlier resolution that the entire property, including what they're proposing for the shul and the subdivision, would be one property for the shul and the community center, which would provide enough parking because they're going to be, in essence, two shuls or two sanctuaries in this building, not one. That's one problem. The parking is a problem. The park has never been identified, and it hasn't been bonded for, and it should have been bonded for. And the ownership of the shul and the community center is supposed to be in a homeowners association, which hasn't been formed. That was a requirement. Hasn't been formed, hasn't been done. And now I'm credibly informed by my clients that Mr. Kaufman is going around saying, well, I'm going to own it and I'm going to sell it if I want to. So this is not just a simple look at this application and look at this application. There's a thing going on here. The township is being ignored. Your prior approvals are being ignored. I don't think this matter should be heard until that's straightened out. Now, I recall at the last meeting, the chairman and I believe Mr. Jackson indicated that they wanted me and Mr. Pfeffer to get together and try to resolve this. I never heard from Mr. Pfeffer on this issue at all. So finally, in desperation, last week I wrote the letter. I don't know what his explanation is for not contacting me. I told him as I left the meeting the last time, call me, talk to me, we'll try to work this out, as the chairman had indicated and as Mr. Jackson has indicated. Mr. Pfeffer just wants to plunge ahead, put the blinders on, put blinders on you, and try to get this thing through so his client can keep building despite the fact that he's not in compliance with prior resolutions. And that's really the problem that this community has with this developer. Thank you.
I emphatically disagree with the majority of what was said.
I think this is a different entity. I think it's a different piece of property. In fact, it's similar, it's the same principle, but it's a different corporate entity. And I don't think that this application should be used as a means of enjoining or remedying what may or may not be wrong with that other application. I think that's a administration and compliance issue. I think the people who bought houses have their remedy, and they can go to court. They can complain to the administration.
I think I read the resolutions. They have to give any money, or everything has to do with the CO.
Right.
CO should be issued with us.
We're not the police, we're not the administrative enforcer. I think that we should look at this application on its own four corners. And if Mr. Liston's correct, he has available other avenues of relief, which I'm sure he will avail himself to. And I think they're better equipped. I'm sorry, Angela?
I just have a comment because I did look at case law regarding this. I was curious to see what the case law says because the municipal land use law really doesn't address developer agreement. And Mr. Liston might want to respond to what I'm about to say. There's a case, a Supreme Court case, Toll Brothers versus Burlington, which talks about how a developer's agreement is an extension of the resolution. And the resolution attaches to the property. So although it was with a different applicant, I'm concerned that that we do have to address it. There is mechanisms for relief with regard to what a developer can be bound to for off-track improvements, and it has to be proportionate to what the improvements are. I'm not saying that the current applicant doesn't have a basis to come to the board to ask for a request for relief based on that prior resolution, but I do think that that actually, I think the procedure may have to be that they have to come back and ask for relief and then we can go forward. I respectfully think we may be bound by it based on the fact that the case law says the developer's agreement is tied to the resolution.
I think you're right. You're absolutely right. And they are tied together. But my understanding is that that resolution does not bind this particular property.
Well, the developer's agreement does, and if it's an
If it does,
extension
then
of
you're
the,
right.
it says on page 11, in 2.9B, it references block 45, lot 9, 445, lot 9, which I think is what we're talking about now, right? This is the developer's agreement dated December 15, 2016. You don't have to. The resolution ties to the land. Otherwise, people would just get land use approvals and then new people would buy it and they could do whatever they want.
Mr. Coleman, you can speak in the...
Sorry. As far as I know, Sidney Krupnik bought this piece of property, so he didn't even own it.
Correct.
The township sold it.
The township sold it to...
Sold it. This went up,
Yes.
this was an auction.
Yeah.
I
And our,
understand what
in
you're saying.
response-
I'm curious to hear
well, in
what the
response
attorneys have to say about
yeah.
that.
So in response to Angela, so there are a few points that we would like to make. Number one,
Can I interrupt you for a moment? I
Just call
keep
me
on saying
Angela.
Mr. Grafos is correct. If there's a developer's agreement, it would attach to this property. If it refers to this lot and block. And I would like to know whether the person who made that developer's agreement at the time had a property interest that they could tie this property in. But,
No, they did not.
well, I don't know how to deal with that.
so let me...
The township certainly thought they had the authority to tie in.
Correct. So there are a few points.
One at a time, Mr. Pfeffer.
When I say they, I mean, if there's a developer's agreement and somebody made a covenant that they would bind this lot and block to that developer's agreement, the town signed it, the developer signed it, and now the holder of the property saying, we're not bound by that because we didn't own the property at the time, I don't know. Am I getting that correct?
No, I don't know if you can buy property that nobody owns. Like, it's like me saying, I'm gonna build a playground on John's property. But again, still, I don't think that negates or I don't think it creates like a novation with developer's agreement where it no longer exists or didn't happen. I think that's still something where it's tied to that resolution. The developer's agreement had to be made the resolution required the developer's agreement.
Yes.
So if it's in existence, I think that the applicant actually has to ask for relief from it. Now, I'm not saying, that when they ask for relief from it, that whether we're going to approve that or not, but I think that's a procedural issue that we have to get to first.
So
I thank you for pointing that out.
So if I could just address...
Okay, Mr. Pfeffer.
And I thank you for your comments. And again, I'm not familiar with the case. I read the case to say exactly how the case, every case is very fact specific. I don't know if that case talked about the developer's agreement and the approval were different entities as it is in here. The developer's agreement and the prior approval is MNYK Developers at Prospect LLC. That was the developer's agreement we're talking about. Tonight we're talking about the Prospect Street Holdings. Now, with all of that being said, and I think we could even put some of this argument to the side and come back to it, because when we get to our testimony, it is our opinion and it is our testimony that we meet all of the criteria that was in the developer's agreement, the prior resolutions, and that we're meeting those criteria. We disagree that all these other things are tied in, and I disagree with some of the opinions that Mr. listed how he read his interpretation of the letter, but we will address each of those points, and we will get to the point where we will show that in the end, the argument of does the developer's agreement tie into another entity, or does it tie into another property, does it restrict it? It's all going to be moot when we give our testimony that we've met all the conditions in the developer's agreement, all the conditions in the prior approvals. So that's why I like to say, let us put on our proofs, let us address all of those issues, and we will circle back. And in my opinion, I don't think it even needs to be addressed at the moment, because we feel we're going to address all of the conditions and concerns in these agreements.
Okay, so I think last time we were here, the position was that we're not bound by the development agreement.
I still don't, no.
You don't know, you're not bound.
No, I still don't believe, again, subject to this new case that you're, not new, but the case that you're referencing, prior to that case, no, we are not bound by it. That being said, and this is what we were trying to get, we never got to the last meeting as well, we are going to meet all of those criteria. If in the end, and don't forget, the applicant, MNYK Developers, has conditions they have to meet, right? It's a signed developers agreement, right? We got a letter from Mrs. Eager, yes, and it was indicated from Mr. Liston that Mary Weinstein indicated she's holding, as to how many deposits she's holding, she didn't know how many closings there were. But it's in there, $10,000 being held from every closing, it's being done. There were other issues raised. I read Mr. Seacare's letter. He didn't address, he said, go back before the board. This is not our jurisdiction to address. So I'm not saying that I now am saying, oh yes, we're bound by it, but I'm saying we're going to satisfy it, and let's just get our proofs in. Maybe you're going to just feel that we're not satisfying it, and that's another issue. But I believe the prior resolutions talk about again, we'll get to it, a 10,000 square foot synagogue. If we get to the site plan, we have a 10,000 square foot synagogue, where it talks about parking, it's fully compliant. We have no variances. There's nothing, nowhere in any of the resolutions does talk about there couldn't also be 2 duplexes that are also fully conforming. So this is the reason why I was asking, let us start the application, put our proofs on, get the testimony, get to the parts where we're going to address all the resolutions, all the items. Maybe you're going to look at me and say, you're crazy, and you have not satisfied a thing, but I think we
What
have.
I recommend is that if the board is the board inclined to hear this case and then make a decision at the end of it, or do you want to stop it at this point?
See, clear
Clear the whole thing. Maybe you hear the whole case and then you make it. So let's let the applicant put their case on, then Mr. Liston, you put your case on, then we'll make a decision.
Can I respond to what was...
We want to move forward. I'm not stopping.
I was asked by the board member who raised this to respond. You let Mr. Pfeffer respond, I'd like to respond.
There's going to be plenty of time for the objectors to speak.
Through the chair.
I'm going to go forward with an application. You spoke, and you'll object to whatever.
Go back and forth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to move the application as quickly as possible. Again, Adam Pfeffer, to the applicant. As you heard before, this is a subdivision to create 2 duplex lots and a 5th lot. That lot we will get to, will be the second application, will be a site.
For one moment, Mr.
Yes.
Flansbaum just said to me that he did not hear the first part of this case.
Well, so I'm putting my proofs on at the beginning.
Well, that's on the site plan. If it comes to voting on the subdivision and it's tied into them, I don't think we should vote on it until he hears both. This is the take.
My other thing was I was going to give all my testimony again. To me, I'm starting the application again because we needed further clarification, and we're going to have all of our testimony. We're not skipping anything. We're going through I don't think we put all our testimony on last time.
Let's see where it goes. Go forward with your case.
Thank you. We are. If I can swear in Brian Flannery at this time?
Do you swear affirm testimony to give before the board with the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Brian Flannery Jackson, New Jersey, licensed professional engineer, professional planner.
And let me just, I don't think we can just swear from the beginning. We had a case where we heard the subdivision, there was a 4-4 vote, the board retained jurisdiction, that doesn't all just go away, that's still all part of this, we can't just forget that. There were people who might have commented at that time, so, you can put your proofs on for the site plan, which is in some ways independent of the subdivision, but when we go back to the subdivision.
Well, we're on this, I thought we're here in the subdivision now. We didn't finish our case. Yes.
Natalie, who was here by the last application? Do we have a
Everyone
quorum?
except for Mr. Flansbaum.
So we have a quorum.
Yes, we still have a quorum.
Dave wasn't
Last
here
time
either.
was Franklin, Hipperson, Herzl, Fallman, Zagrafos, and Garfield.
He was here. So we have a quorum.
Yeah, the quorum's not the issue, it's a question of who can vote, but you can hear it, you can participate in the case, and then if it doesn't get finished, you can listen to the transcript. If it does get finished, when it comes time to vote, you can't vote.
Well, there's one other issue. The board voted on the subdivision and turned it down by a tie vote. Then it said it was going to retain jurisdiction. So are you going to hear the whole thing all over again and try to nullify the...
No, like I said, we're not going to hear the whole thing over. They're going to, what are our procedures as far as additional?
We have to put up, this is why, last time,
Put them through the site plan, because that had bearing on the subdivision.
we are going to get through everything. There were questions raised at the last hearing, which we would like to give our testimony on it. There were additional questions raised. Additionally, as I asked last time, I asked at the beginning of this time, I would like both applications to be heard individually. You could vote however you're going to vote. Last time, right away, we started talking about the site plan, the entire application. We never put our proofs on for the site plan, but our
Subdivision, we heard the subdivision.
no, that, we started with our subdivision, but then there were issues raised, we were never had a chance to address them, because we went right into the site plan, because we heard them as one application, and we never got to do our proofs. I'm indicating as as the applicant, are ready to put our proofs on. Mr. Flannery is here, we would like to start, and by doing so, we're going to be answering a lot of the questions that were either raised last time, raised just a few minutes ago, and then you'll be able to have the opportunity to vote.
Well, I would raise this question to Mr. Jackson. How do you overcome the fact that there was a vote on the subdivision, it was a tie vote, and so it was a denial? How do
And
you
they
overcome
retain
that?
jurisdiction.
For what purpose?
Can I just?
To give you another bite at the apple?
Mr. Liston, I'll tell you, the reason why it was a tie vote because we didn't hear enough information. We wanted to hear the whole site plan and subdivision. We were missing some information. That's why the board voted as a tie. If we had information, we would have a vote.
There's also a practical aspect, We had a brand new board member who took the oath that night. I don't know if he understood the consequences of a fully conforming site plan. I also know what happens time and time again when we have a fully conforming application and it goes to court and gets remanded. Cox does talk about, there are cases that talk about the board retaining jurisdiction. And you can reconsider things when there's been mistake or additional facts. And I'm just trying to be practical in that I know by every indication it was a fully conforming subdivision application. That was a tie vote. I don't know if there were other conditions that, if there would have been further votes after that. If I remember at the end of the night, when it ended at the end of that, it was contentious. So, the board still has jurisdiction. I think the matter's still open. And it was a motion to deny, to approve it. That was, I think it was 4-4 and 3-3. There was no motion to deny it. I know a motion to approve that doesn't pass is akin, it's the same thing as a denial. But other conditions put on, and there were board members who said they did not want to hear the case because they wanted to consider the site plan first. So we're trying to be practical, and I think we should go forward.
We can move very quickly through the subdivision, hit the major points, and then we will address the site plan.
So I wasn't comfortable, I wanted to get it tested.
So that's what the board's on that topic.
Okay, so please proceed.
So I have 4 renderings here this evening. A1 is sheet 3 of the 13.
Yes, you swore me.
Yeah. Sheet 3 of the set that was submitted, it shows the outbound of the track in orange, which, for the record, is Lot 9 and Lot 19. There's been a lot of talk about Lot 9. The applicant also acquired Lot 19. As indicated prior, this lot was owned by the township. The township sold it at a public auction. Mr. Krupnik bought it. This applicant bought Lot 9 and Lot 19 and is back to the board to do a shul and a recreation area that meets the requirements that were listed in the resolution of the other applications that have nothing to do with this. So this A1 shows the outbound in orange.
Ryan, 1 second.
Can I stop you? So the sequence of this lot, this was sold by the township to Mr. Crupnik.
Then there's 2 lots here. Mr. Krupnik owned Lot 19, the township owned Lot 9.
Can you point the 2 lots out to me? I thought it was 1 lot that we were subdividing.
It's two.
On A3, I have it highlighted in orange. The entire rectangle is what the application is here this
That's the
evening.
subject lot, okay.
Lot 9 is the township lot. Lot 19 was the lot owned by Krupnik.
The bigger lot is the township lot.
Right. Krupnik bought Lot 19 from the township at an auction.
Lot 9.
Lot 9 from the township at an auction, and as part of this process, it'll be merged with Lot 19 to accomplish the shul that was talked about for the other developers, the other applicants, in the other
So
resolution.
did Mr. Krupnik buy this property in his own name, or is it held in a corporate name?
That I'm not sure.
Does he still hold this property? Is he still the
No,
No, this applicant now owns the property.
It's been closed.
yes.
Uh,
Can we have a date on that? When was it closed?
We'll get to that.
So A1 shows the outbound of the entire, of both lots. The pink shows the lot lines for the 5 conforming lots. There was no testimony from anyone that there's any variances relating to those 5 conforming lots. And in yellow is where the shul is intended. A2 is just the tax map which colored the entire lot in orange. A3 is an exhibit that I'm presenting this evening, and what I colored in on A3 is orange is the 2 lots of this subject application. The 2 prior YK applications are in pink, so the board can see the close proximity of the 2 of them. And the blue are the Block 445 and Block 471, which are mentioned in the minutes and the resolutions, just so the board can see everything that's there. A4 shows the site plan that's proposed, and it shows the outbound of the 30,000 square foot lot that will be for the shul and the recreation, along with the shul in blue and the parking in front of it. It also shows improving Blanche Street and Columbus Avenue with on-street parking on both sides. It'll be paved 32 foot wide, which will allow for parking on both sides. And the plan shows 34 on-street parking spaces that would be accomplished by parking. Now, when the application...
When Mr. Krupnik bought the lot, the main portion of the lot from the town, was the resolution that Angela read, was that before or after that?
The resolution was before that, so that if the township felt this lot was bound, they should have never sold it at public auction. So it seems clear that the intent...
When it was sold at public auction, were there any restrictions?
No restrictions.
Covenants that went with that sale?
No restrictions.
So as far as you know, the title when that was sold was green clear?
Correct. Correct.
Let me just correct something you said, Mr.
We're putting our testimony
I'd like
on.
to hear what Mr. Wilson has to say.
Angela read from the developer's agreement,
Yes.
which was dated less than a year ago,
Right, what's the date of that development?
December 15, 2016.
16. And by that time, it's my contention that the developer here, his alter ego, Jack Kaufman, who signed the developer's agreement on behalf of the other entity, is the principal in this entity, and so...
I understand, but what I don't, where you're disagreeing, but what I'm asking though, when Mr. Krupnik closed, when did Mr. Krupnik buy this? When was the public auction when Mr. Krupnik took title?
I'm going to try and pull up the
You said
deed.
that it was after the date.
I'm going to try and pull up the deed.
I just want to...
Well, it was a long time after the prior applications and the resolutions on the prior
What about that
application.
developer's date?
When you look at the prior resolutions, one of them is from the meeting at February 2015, and it says, the applicant shall acquire the property. It doesn't say that they already own it. So the resolution knew that it was not, it acknowledges it was not yet owned. So I don't know if that's something we have to argue.
Well, I just think we need to know that factually.
No, but my goal here is just make sure I have a really clear record, because it's obvious that this.
I just want to know if Mr. Krupnik bought this at auction, if he had the ability at that point to, put a wall on it.
Well, I think anytime
Point
that
is
you
he
buy
didn't.
property at auction, it's usually, at least when I do it for Manchester, it's with, not with a bargain sale deed, it's with a quitclaim deed, and you take it tied to any prior approvals,
I agree.
mediation, and stuff like that. So I don't know whether he could use it or not, or if it was tied to this.
That's why I asked him whether there were any restrictions on it. He said no.
Well,
Obviously, we'll have to check that out.
Right, the developer's agreement is, I mean, it was, what do you call it? It was recorded. But I don't know if it was recorded tied to that, yeah.
yeah, but Krupnik then sold it to Jack Klugman, in the person of the LLC that's before you now, who owned it, I believe, in December of 2016 when he signed the developer's agreement, and he agreed to use that property, that Lot 9, for the shul. Now he's coming before you and saying, well, not so fast. You understand?
I just
He's
wanted to-
cutting it up.
That's not what we're saying.
What's the sequence? Did we have the date?
I'm trying to pull it up.
Mr. Flannery, how do you know that
Pardon me?
bought the property after the date of development?
I didn't say after the date of development agreement, I'm saying after the date of the resolution. And Mr. Krupnik, who's also a client of mine, asked me to look at it and see
Or
that,
I should say before the date of development. I just think the board should know what the dates were.
and hopefully Adam's going to find that.
In your testimony, there's no restrictions on the lot. You can do whatever you want with the lot.
Mr. Krupnik could have done anything he wanted with the lot.
But he sold it to Jack
Okay.
Klugman.
So now, at the last meeting, Mr. Liston suggested that we look at the minutes of the MNYK developers meeting. And although it's still my contention that that's not part of this application, but let's just do that. Rather than talk about it, we'll just do it. So on page 7 of the January 20th, 2015 minutes, it talks about, and this is me talking, the applicant is working with the township to provide both recreation and a shul. The game plan is to do recreation on a township-owned property, and that was this discussion with MNYK and the township at the time, was to take a township property, and I think they were looking at 2 acres, and then MNYK would pay for the development of a park, and it would be a public park. The applicant would be responsible for development of the recreation, which would then be a public park, and I indicate that would far exceed the 5% set-aside requirement. I think it's important also to look at, Mr. Liston did a very good job of inaccurately portraying the prior applicants as not doing what they said they were going to do, and being somehow subversive and getting around the rules. At that time, there was no requirement for the applicant to agree to put in a shul and recreation. He did it at the prompting of Mr. Schmuckler, and he did it because he intended to do it anyway. And he told his buyers, because he knows in order to sell the units, you need to have a place for them to pray, and associated with that as a recreation area. But if you took a 10-acre area in here, you'd need to set aside 5% of that. That would be half an acre. This shul lot that we're doing is 30,000 square feet, so it's 50% greater than if it was all developed as one piece. So the applicant...
Can we just work our way through this portion of it? Because, first of all, whether the applicant was required to do it, or whether they weren't required to do it, whether they did because Mr. Schmuckler asked or whatever, that's in the resolution, so those are the facts that are in.
Yes, but I think it's important if Mr. Liston...
How big, you're saying that the set-aside was supposed to be 1/2 acre?
I'm saying that the mandatory set-aside would be 1/2 acre. I'm going to read what was in the...
Can you please work us through that?
Yes, but I thought it was important because Mr. Liston spends a good deal of time portraying the applicants
as... The site that's up there in the orange is bigger than 1/2 acre.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let's see if it's actually...
But if he can portray the applicants as disingenuous, I think it's
I just want to simply know
important.
whether he said that the set-aside had to be 1/2 acre, or if that's sufficient, and if this is 1/2 acre.
Set aside for what?
Well, he said it was for the shul.
It's
that
not.
the-
So here's going on to page 8, where Mr. Schmuckler said 110 seats is not going to be sufficient. The shul should have a minimum of 220 seats. He asked if a 10,000 square foot shul could be built with 5,000 square feet on each floor. That's what the application is for,
Where are you
10,000.
reading that from?
And we should mark that
Page 8 of the January 20th board minutes that Mr. Liston said we should look at.
I will mark that as
then-
A5.
Let me just restate that if I can.
Mr. Schmuckler said 110 seats is not going to be sufficient. There will be 220 families. The shul should have a minimum of 220 seats. He asked if a 10,000 square foot shul could be built with an area of 5,000 square feet on each floor.
All right, so that's what you're proposing.
That is what's being
Right,
proposed
and
here
that's
this
what
evening.
his transitory comment was in the minutes. What does the resolution exactly say?
Well,
on the requirements?
if you'd like me to keep going back and forth, we can do it that way.
There's a difference between what someone says in the colloquy at a meeting and what's in the...
Well, I fully intended to go through all of it because I can see that the board wants to be clear, and anything I don't say, Mr. Liston's going to say, so let's just say it all. So now we get to the resolution, ST 1997, on January 20th, 2015.
From Marcus A6.
Is that the first resolution on?
This is the first resolution.
That's for the,
MNYK.
that's for the blue piece on the lower level? On A3?
No, it's the
pink.
pink one.
The pink one.
The pink one. So, under F, the conditions on page 3, number 1 is the applicant seeking subdivision approval. Number 2, the applicant agrees to enter into a developer's agreement with the township whereby a recreation area within 1,000 feet of the subject property and a community center on either block 445 or 471 will be constructed. 445 is all the properties shown in blue in addition to the orange one. So there are other properties in block 445. 471 is the other blue one down below. So there were options at that time where this shul and recreation area could be provided.
Let me stop you 1 minute. So if I understand, that resolution does not address the lot and block that you're here for tonight. It says you can build it on one of the 2 blue properties.
It shows it lists the block. This is block 4045. So it could be on either the blue one on 471, the orange one on 445, or the blue one on 445.
Is there anything in that resolution that says how big the lot has to be?
Well, let's read everything. The applicant has agreed to acquire a nearby parcel and to construct a 10,000 square foot community center to be available for the use of the nearby residents. The residents of the proposed subdivision shall be provided the opportunity to purchase 1/150th shares in the community center for a nominal fee, and the applicant shall place $10,000 per lot as sold in an attorney escrow account.
So that appears to say that the community center has to be 10,000 square feet.
Right.
Yes,
And it has to
5,000 square feet per floor, as Mr. Schmuckler said in the minutes.
Okay, so you think putting the 2 of them together, you fulfill that criteria?
Yes.
And it also says you have to sell it to the homeowners?
No, I
Does not say so.
I can read, there will be a separate entity for it. I'm going to get...
One out of
It should be, it's no different, in our interpretation, no different than a member of an HOA, a homeowner association, pays a 1/150th to be a member in that community, to pay for the maintenance, the running of it. Again,
Well, that's a different issue.
Correct, we'll go-
Who has to pay for it? Let's find out if he's fulfilled his responsibility.
Number 4, condition
What
number...
his promises were. Let's find out what the
Condition number
promises
4 is the applicant will make a diligent effort to acquire land from the township to develop a park which would be owned by the township. And that comes from the minutes that I didn't get to yet, where the applicant that applicant, MNYK, had discussions with the township about taking a 2-acre park because the smart growth plan showed township-owned property to be a park. The applicant thought a good solution would be he'll spend the money, develop the park, and there's a public park that'll service.
So your position is that the applicant did make diligent efforts to get a park?
Yes.
Is there a park? Were those diligent
Well,
efforts successful?
there's a recreation area proposed in the back of this shul area.
To be owned by who?
It's going to be owned by the entity that owns the shul.
Not the township. It's not supposed to be owned by the township?
What was in here is he was making a diligent effort to have the township allow him to build a park that would be a township park. The governing body and MNYK will have to show the township that, and they'll have to show the residents, and they'll have to show all the bodies that have jurisdiction over that he made a diligent effort, and the township said, no, we don't want to do that. So in lieu of that, he is providing recreation and a shul in accordance with the requirements in the resolution.
And it doesn't say he's required to make
He's not required, he's required to make a diligent effort. Now, the other resolution says more, and the minutes say more. So back to the minutes of January 20th, after Mr. Schmuckler makes his comment, I was asked a question on page 9, and Mr. Flannery said the condition would be that it would be deeded over to a separate nonprofit. And that's what it is. And Mr. Liston's going to ask who that nonprofit is. He can ask MNYK, and they will tell him that at such time as they have to do it in accordance with the requirements that they've stipulated. Right after I said that, Mr. Jackson is not sure they could do that as part of this application. Because if you remember, even at the time, you were a little uncomfortable with how, as part of a 20-lot subdivision, you can require somebody to do something. And the reason it went so easily is because this applicant intended to do it anyway.
Yeah, it wasn't part of the requirements for this
That is correct.
size application, but they did it anyway.
And I said that
But I think that all is...
three comments further down,
Agree to it, and it is in the resolution, so
Yes,
the question
yes.
is whether you comply with it or not. So far you've shown us, it's 10,000 square feet. You say you're providing a 10,000, we'll call it a community center. I don't want to say whether it
That is correct.
be a shul or not. I think that's not the board's concern.
Right.
And you make provisions to meet the spirit of the park, and you say that you made diligent inquiry.
Yes.
Now, with the developer's agreement, does the developer's agreement go further than what the resolution says?
Yes, it does.
Well,
There's another,
the developer's agreement mentions a shul on block 445.
Does it
Lot
specifically
nine.
say a shul?
Well, it says a community center, so let's call this a community center because we all know what the board was asking for and what's being proposed here. So we now have a community center proposed.
I don't know, maybe that's where we're going to have bingo and different kinds of
Well, this will be a community center that meets the intent of what was required.
I'm sorry, the developer's agreement says what?
That there'll be a community center on block 445, lot 9.
That's this.
We're here this evening for approval to put a community center on
10,000 square
block
feet.
445, lot 9. A 10,000 square foot community center, just as is indicated. It doesn't say all of block 445, lot 9 will be the shul. It says a 10,000 square foot shul will be constructed on.
It says 10,000 square feet. And
Yes.
it says a community center.
Yes.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to show us to go?
Well,
Yeah.
I want to talk about the February 17th minutes.
and that was for a different approval.
This is the next.
That's for the next pink one, because there were two,
Correct.
right, there were
To the
two,
left, to the east.
there were two
Just show on the map, isn't it?
So this was the first one?
the furthest one away.
What was the date of that resolution?
I'm reading from the minutes of February 17th, 2015.
That's the second one.
That's the second.
That's the
Well,
first.
the first one that Adam's pointing at, 472, was the minutes of January 20th,
Can you put
2015.
120 on that, above or on the street above it?
That's
120?
Yeah, 120.
That was-
Date, 12016?
15.
15.
For the record, that was resolution 1997. Am I correct?
Yes,
And that's the one we just went through.
yes.
Which one's the record?
Now, there's a second.
461 was February 17th, 2015.
So this is a second parcel, second application.
Yes, and this one is
And this also
SD
relates.
1998. Yes.
And it has nothing to do with the old application. It's a
Separate
different parcel.
Same owner.
That was the same owner.
Just alluding to the same shul or.
We'll get to exactly what
Yes.
So
so-
there were requirements for that to provide a community center.
Correct. This was a month later, same applicant, same good intentions, fully intended to do something for the residents anyway, and agreed to the same type of language. On this one, on page 4 of those minutes, Mr. Schmuckler talked about the 120 shares, and Mrs. Weinstein asked that it be at least 150. Mr. Schmuckler said he's okay with that. That would cover anyone else in the area that builds, and 10,000 square foot to be able to handle that amount of members. On page 3 of those minutes, toward the bottom of it, with respect to the lots and stuff, Mr. Renner said that the resolution could reference one of the 6 blocks or within 1,000 square feet, because the discussion at that time was they didn't know exactly where it could be, and that was Mr. Renner's comment. When we get to the actual resolution,
Resolution number 1.
This is Resolution SD 1998 on February 17th, 2015, on the MNYK Developers application. Under G, finding of facts, the applicant agrees to enter into a developer's agreement with the township whereby a recreation area within 1,000 feet of the subject property and a community center on either Block 445 or 471 will be constructed. And that's what we're here for.
Was it the intent, and I'm going to ask Mr. Foreman, because I think he has a vivid recollection, was it the intent that you could use the same community center for both of those developments?
Yes.
Mr. Foreman, do you have any recollection of this? You don't remember that part? Does anyone? Does anything in the resolution say that, or give an indication that they did not mean a separate?
Well,
Mr.
right in
Jackson,
these minutes.
I believe the resolutions do specifically say that in the second resolution,
Yeah.
there's a paragraph, maybe on the first or
Yes.
second page,
Yeah.
that says this is
Second.
the same community building that is
Yeah.
referenced in SB
At
1997.
the end of that comment that I was reading, where he enters into within 1,000 feet on it, shall be no CO issued until the recreation and community center have been constructed. So that particular block, there is a provision to make sure this
I
gets
remember there
done.
was an enhanced ratio, and I wrote those resolutions, but
Well, originally there was talk about 110 or 120 seats, and it went up to 150, as
To
Mr.
accommodate
Schmuckel
the
said,
additional
to accommodate other stuff in here.
That's-
The last sentence in that says, "The community center and recreation area are the same as those required under approval number SD
Okay,
1997."
so your position, and just so I can just try to frame the issue again, is that both of the developments shown in A3, what was it, 20 houses per,
Yes,
20
20 duplex
20
dwelling
duplex,
units
40
each.
and 40.
No,
Basements.
20 and,
10
well,
duplex or 20 duplex?
well, we typically don't
I'll
count
call
the
it 20
basements
for
because
the sake
those
of
are
this
apartments.
discussion. The 20 and 20 on the 2 pink triangles, or I'm
Yes.
sorry, rectangles, both of those were supposed to make one community center of 10,000 square feet, 2 floors of 5,000 square feet each. Plus, they were supposed to have efforts to have a park.
Yes,
And you're...
to have recreation. Well, an effort to develop a township park or provide
And
recreation.
there were provisions where the money was going to be escrowed and shares were going to be offered, and this developer was going to fulfill those promises from that escrow and build a recreation center on the lot that you're reporting.
Yes,
And your position is that the developer's agreement is in accord with that.
yes.
Is there anything else? Because I want to ask Mr. Liston at this point whether he agrees or disagrees with that analysis, and if he does, to explain why. And I hope the board will indulge me, it's a little out of it, but I think we should address this issue now.
Well, the other issue that's going to come up is parking, which when I do the testimony on the site
We'll
plan,
segregate the parking issue.
okay,
All I want to know is whether there were any promises, covenants, handshakes, whatever, from any source that says that this applicant is not fulfilling that responsibility with this proposal. And I have to fill in Mr. Liston is going to not disappoint me that he has a different take on this.
I certainly do, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson, as you know, because you draft all these resolutions, there is a catch-all provision at the end under conditions, which says any and all promises or representations made by the applicant or his professionals are binding and are made part of the resolution. So you can't really segregate the minutes from the resolution because they're included by reference in the resolution, and that's where all this colloquy and the 120 became 150, and
Well, there's
I
also
just-
dialogue during a hearing.
Right.
The
Correct.
Promise and a representation is different than a discussion and talking about the possibility.
Right.
So you're talking about things at the during the hearing that the applicant
Promise.
presumably should be in the resolution.
And was supposed to provide these amenities for 120 people, 120 families, and then suddenly it got bumped up to 150. But be that as it may, the Lot 9 in Block 445, which existed when Mr. Kaufman signed the developers agreement in December of 2016, is not the Lot 9 that they're asking you to create now. It's less. He's carving out of that Lot 9 the subdivision to build more for-profit housing.
Can I ask you, is there anything in either the resolution or the developer's agreement that talks about the size of the lot?
No, it just says, let me finish. It just says on December 16th, December 15th, 2016, which funds shall be utilized by the developer towards the construction of a community center on Block 445, Lot 9. Lot 445, Lot 9, as it existed on that date that Kaufman signed this developer's agreement, is not,
Okay, so your position is that...
it's not the same Lot 9 they're asking you to create.
And that's...
What they're asking you to create is a lot less.
Okay.
They're trying to cheat these people out of what they're entitled to.
Mr. Liston, your position is that those promises and those representations, the resolution of the developer's agreement contemplated all four corners of Lot 9.
Yes, absolutely.
Even the portion at the time that was owned by Mr. Krupnik?
No, the portion, no, because Mr. Krupnik didn't own any portion of Lot 9.
Okay.
Lot 9 of Lot 445 was owned by the township. The town, let me finish, because this is going to get way out of hand. The township put it out to bid, Mr. Krupnik bought it. Mr. Krupnik then sold it to Mr. Kaufman as Prospect Street Developers. And so that is the Lot 9 which this agreement contemplated, the full size of Lot 9 which this agreement contemplated. Not the skinny down, chopped up piece of Lot 9 that they want to try to stick these people with.
Just as a community center.
What Mr. Flannery pointed to a colloquy and sections in the resolutions that talked about a 5,000 square foot community center times 2. Is that inaccurate, what Mr. Flannery said?
I don't believe it is. I don't believe it's inaccurate. However,
I'm sorry, you believe it's inaccurate?
no, I don't. I believe that's what was contemplated, a
Okay.
total of 10,000 square
You agree
feet.
that they're proposing a 10,000 square foot community center?
Yes, they are, but they are proposing it on a smaller Lot 9 so they can chop out
All right.
some profit-making property for
Is
themselves.
it as simple as you believe they're not fulfilling the spirit and intent of what their agreement is by carving out the residential units, and the applicant believes that they are because they're providing an adequate 10,000 square foot recreation center? Is that what the issue is?
That's the
Is that
issue.
simple?
And I think the problem is that the parking that's being provided, while it may comply with your ordinances,
That's a different
Okay.
issue. So would it be...
What the town agreed to,
Thank you.
what the town agreed to is, in December, they said, you're going to build this on Lot 9 and Block 445, not on a lesser size Lot 9 that they're trying to get you guys to approve now.
Okay.
They're bound by that. Now,
Mr.
can they get
Liston-
out of that? Sure they can. They can go back.
Yeah, Mr. Liston, we have to be courteous to the court report, and
Well, I think that
Mr.
is...
Liston,
I heard speak for whatever.
can I please, Mr. Liston?
One at a time.
We're the board, I think you have to try to refer to us when we are trying to speak, and,
Okay,
I don't
I
want to
apologize.
step over you, please don't step over me, but I think, push comes to shove, I think the board's going to pick out. So just try to defer to that to keep the court reporter sane. So I see no reason to, the board can make that decision at the end of the case and determine if the applicant is not fulfilling their promises, as you have said, or if they are, as the applicant believes they are. So I don't see anything in those resolutions that specifically address the size of the lot or the final configuration of Lot 9 will be. And you're outraged on behalf of your clients, or your clients are outraged that they're taking out the four lots to put units on, And the applicant is saying, no, we're providing everything that we promised. We're providing a 10,000 square foot community center. We think we've got the parking. We think we fulfill the letter and the spirit of, and that's the dilemma. So
That's basically the dilemma,
I
but,
think I framed the issue. We would like that, Mr. So
I hear the
I'd let you come in the middle so we get our hands
Okay.
around what the issue is.
let me just make one more comment. And the comment is, this agreement is with the Township of Lakewood. This board, I don't think can say, well, it said Lot 9 as Lot 9 existed, but we're going to let them shrink it and the town's going to be stuck with that. The only way this agreement can change from the Lot 9 that existed in December of 2016 is if the township agrees to it. And I don't see how the township can even consider that. I don't see how this board can consider the subdivision until the town clarifies what it believes it agreed to.
Do you have any documents or restrictions or covenants, contractual specifications, bid specifications, et cetera, that would restrict the purchaser of Lot 9 from altering its configuration or from using it however they wanted to use it?
Well, no, but you have to look at the date of the contract and who the contracting parties are. And Lot 9 in Block 445 on that day, that Mr. Kaufman signed this agreement with the township, is not the Lot 9 he's asking you to cut down and approve this on. And that legally, I believe, is enough to trigger this board not hearing the subdivision application or the other application until that's clarified.
Thank you.
Through the chair. John, I think I'm going to respectfully disagree with Mr. Liston because the case law says the developer's agreement is attached to the resolution, and an applicant can come back to the board to request relief from the developer's agreement to the planning board if there is a change in circumstances. And I view what is happening here is that the applicant is coming to the board and requesting relief and asking to subdivide. They're asking us to, if the township did intend that Lot 9 had to stay as Lot 9, I think their position is we're asking for relief from that, and I think we do have jurisdiction here.
I don't think, when you read the resolution, I don't think it says over there that we need the whole Lot 9.
It doesn't say it, and that's an interpretation issue, but we have I'm just saying that we have the ability to interpret that.
Well,
since we
I
have a
think you do.
dispute.
I think you have to at the end of this case.
It-
But
what-
if he needs relief from that prior approval, that has to be in the context of that prior application. They have to know.
Right.
Which I don't, so I think at the end of this case, the board's going to have to decide if the spirit and letter of previous resolutions and the developer's agreement have been fulfilled.
Right.
And,
What-
and
yeah.
and you may say subdivision doesn't fulfill that, and you may say it doesn't matter, it's still a 10,000 square foot, and that's a collective decision the board has to make. And
Yeah.
I think you should make it after you've heard the whole case.
One other little wrench I want to add into this is, of course, I did look at the Ocean County Clerk's website to see the ownership of the property. And I do think that needs to be fleshed out. It's a little confusing. It turns out that Prospect does not, from what the deed, there's a deed in May 5th, 2017 going from, February 14th, 2017, Prospect sold it to Buckwall, which is not on the application as the owner. And before that, Buckwall did a notice of settlement saying that they were going to enter into a lease agreement with the original applicant, who was named her. So it's not linear here. And I know you were concerned about when do people know things. So
I think the board should know that and that should be part of the record.
yeah.
I think that raises a jurisdictional issue because you don't have the property owner before you.
No, well, listen, we have applications all the time. Don't we have applications without property owners? You can,
As long as you have an interest in the property.
so,
So let's continue with let's hear the rest of the application.
Mr. Chairman, let me just make one jurisdictional point, 2 points actually. One is, there has been no notice for the relief being sought here to change the size of Lot 9.
I'm
That,
not so sure the receipt.
it's not in the notice, number one, and number two, the applicant that is bound by that isn't also before the board. So what has to happen is, MNYK has to come back before the board and ask for that relief. because that's who's bound. They were saying, oh, this is a...
Interpretation.
Excuse me, can I finish?
Jurisdictional issues should have
We
been...
understand your point.
Now that we are this far along, I'm raising, and I'll tell you right now...
You can make your objection when it's your time for the case. I'm going to go for it.
I'm just telling you right now, I'm going to raise it in court. You don't have jurisdiction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Through the chair.
I think you should hear all the facts, let everybody make their arguments, and then decide the case.
Are we rehearing,
As for Mr. Jackson, we will continue.
are we rehearing the subdivision and therefore there should be two separate
Please
public
sit down.
portions?
Please sit down. Please sit down. Okay, Mr. Pfeffer, please sit down.
Okay, please proceed. Now, I think I stopped you.
You stopped, right,
You were talking about your case, we didn't talk about the parking, we went through the history with the deeds and with the resolutions, and, you know.
Have you finished all the resolutions?
No, well-
I think we've read enough about the resolutions. The only thing I'd like to point out is Mr. Liston seems to feel that the developer's agreement says you have to use all of Lot 9 as it exists at the time, and that's not our position at all. Our position is that we were required to build a shul there, and this is the application to build a shul there. If the board were to feel that relief is needed, certainly the notice says any other relief that the board is
Can I skip ahead? Do you meet the ordinance requirements for a community center for parking?
yes.
We
So
exceed-
let's move, why don't we move to that testimony?
So,
So-
Brian, I think the reason why you said lot 9, because I think resolution said it has to be approximately 1,000 feet.
Yes,
And I think you just alluded to say that that's within 1,000 feet,
yes.
but doesn't have to be necessarily the whole lot.
That certainly was our understanding of it, and as Mr. Liston says, you should look at the minutes to see if that backs up the intent of it. And what I read you from the minutes, I think clearly clarifies that was the intent, to have a shul, a community center, 5,000 square feet per floor, within 1,000 feet, and on 445 or 471.
There are 1,000 feet to each application, they're within 1,000 feet.
Certainly less than 1,000
Okay.
feet. You can see the pink and the orange. The second application is right across the street, and the other application is 500 feet away. So they're all well within.
So the ordinance, whatever it says resolution, you fulfill.
Yes.
Okay, please continue.
Looking at Terry's report, on page 2, he mentions the zoning, the community center is a permitted use. He has a comment, and number 2, with respect to a variance for the rear yard. And if you look at Exhibit 8.4, the issue is that the plans drawn by New Line show the rear line to the north, and this is, the ordinance defines through lots and corner lots. This is like a super corner lot because there's 2 corners and we have frontage on 3 streets. I've highlighted in blue the building, and the entrance to the building clearly faces Blanche. My interpretation is the rear is behind that, and you have a side next to it. And I think the ordinance backs that up rather clearly. Definitions, 18-219, lot corner, parcel of land abutting on 2 or more intersecting streets where the interior angle of the intersection does not exceed 135 degrees. Each corner lot shall have 2 front yards, a minimum of 1 side yard, and 1 rear yard. And to me, the only logical place for the rear yard, the way Lakewood has done it all along, is behind the building. And we will stipulate that will be the front of the building, that will be the rear of the building, and we have more than enough.
The other 2 front that you have, you're not asking for any variance.
We're not asking for any relief on the frontages. The only relief that we're asking on this application is there's 1 parking space that is too close to the residential property line. We have more parking spaces than are required by the ordinance. If the board doesn't want to grant that relief, if you don't feel that an additional parking space close to new dwellings that'll be built and know it's there, doesn't make sense, we'll delete that parking space. That's certainly a decision up to the board. My professional opinion is it makes sense. I think the benefits of that an extra parking space are good. All 41 of Mr. Liston's clients, and we only have 20 lots that were part of those two subdivisions, so he got somebody else from somewhere else that's his client on this as well, that are aggrieved by this. They all live within 1,000 feet, but I think they would want that parking space also. But again, that's our position, is it makes sense to have it. If the board doesn't want it, we eliminate the parking space, and we still exceed the parking requirements.
If I can add something, Chairman?
Yes.
I've had the opportunity, that's all right. I've had the opportunity to look at the property and how we had first interpreted the different setbacks. I do agree that this is a corner lot as defined in the UDO. I also agree if the primary entrance to the shul is facing Bland Street as currently depicted, that would be the primary frontage, and by default in the lot corner definition, you have 2 front yards, a minimum of 1 side yard, and 1 rear yard. So what I just testified to, in my opinion, is accurate. The rear yard would be towards the northern property line, the side yard would be towards the duplex lots, and they both comply with standards.
The other two will be in front.
Correct.
So again, Brian, just to be clear, other than the 1 parking space, which it's up to the board if they want it, if not, we'll remove it, we have a fully conforming site plan application for a 10,000 square foot synagogue.
That is correct.
Are we talking about parking
Yes. The main sanctuary is 2,847 square feet.
times 2?
The main sanctuary is 2,847 square feet. That requires by the ordinance 23 parking spaces. We've provided 33. And the parking regulations are stipulated 18-905. A1 under parking, it says a place of worship contains less than 800 square feet of main sanctuary, there shall be no requirement for parking. If more than 800 square feet, then the following required main sanctuary space, in parentheses, main sanctuary area shall not include secondary sanctuary space, mikvah, hallways, bathroom, kitchen, and other ancillary support. So the ordinance clearly says we only need for the main sanctuary. We show a secondary sanctuary, but if you want to, as a practical matter, we have 33, so we have 10 more than for the 1 sanctuary, and we have 34 parking spaces on the street. The ordinance also says,
Brian, how much square foot do you have on the second?
second floor is the same size,
So 28
so it'd be another 23.
So technically, if you wanted to have parking for both, you would need a 1 to the lower 46, right? Is that
Correct.
what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying,
You're saying you don't need it?
yes, I'm
So
saying
if
for
you
the ordinance,
consider both as
for the
a
ordinance we
sanctuary-
comply as common sense. If both are going to be operating at the same time, we need 23 for upstairs, 23 for downstairs. We have 68 when you count the on-street. And in addition to that, Mr. Liston's clients live within 1,000 feet. Some of them live right across the street. So their driveways, and the ordinance specifically says in section 18-807. It's a text, probably just my wife wanted me to pick up milk or something.
So you're saying that...
18-807 says you can have the parking within 1,000 feet of the principal location. The parking spaces were required by these 2 pink applications, which are within 1,000 feet, and MNYK provided them parking right in their driveway.
I just want to also...
ahead, Mr. Pfeffer, excuse me. You're talking about the parking demands for sanctuary. This is supposed to be a community center. Do you have it on good authority that once all the shareholders take control, that they're going to use this as a house of worship?
I have
You have
40 years of experience in Lakewood to know that if we did it a different way, we would do 1 space per 400 square feet.
Okay, so but here's why I'm skipping.
Much less.
Do you anticipate that this will be used as a house of worship to serve the people in the 2 areas on A3, 220-unit developments or duplex developments, and they're all in walking distance, that's where the parking works, I think you're going to say that, you know, a shul or busiest day of the week is a day that everybody has to walk to service.
Right.
So parking's not such an issue, et cetera. Now, the question I have that ties back to the 120 or the 150 shareholders. If this is a community center for those two communities, how is the, you know, once this gets approved and built, all the escrow money goes in there, how will the ownership be transferred to the property owners so that it truly is a community center? And let me finish. And what restrictions are we going to put on that property to make certain that it will be governed, owned, and operated by the community that it's supposed to be serving? And that's the two areas of thing. And just from some of the comments Mr. Liston's made, I have a feeling that they're suspicious that that isn't going to be carried out. And I don't know where I've heard it. You know, people call me and they send me emails, and I'm not a board member, but I remember something about there's two congregations, and there's going to be upstairs one and a downstairs one, and they're different congregations.
That's why I said
Yeah.
we should provide the parking boxes and
Right.
let's
And
consider.
and if we look at this as a community center, you need one parking space for every 400 square feet.
And I think this whole thing
That's
gets-
25.
And I think this gets turned on its head as far as, let me finish, as far as spirit and intent. If this house of worship somehow gets conveyed or put to the use of somebody from outside the neighborhood, or, now, how do we, we're going to, if the board approves this, I think you're going to have deed restrictions and bylaws and master deed, et cetera, that will prove that the property is going to be utilized by the people in the community that's supposed to be serving it.
Well, your prior resolutions and minutes stipulate that.
Okay,
And
fine,
it's
so
clearly
that's
stated-
all, Mr. Becker, that all happened.
It's clear, it's stated that it would be deeded over to a separate nonprofit. He doesn't get building permits on block 461 until he meets that
And I
condition.
think implied in that is that nonprofit would be,
Well, and the nonprofit is going to take these 150 people in
As
for a nominal
shareholders.
fee. That's
Just
stipulated in the resolution.
Just to be
Okay.
clear, you can't, these 150th, if you want to just go by, if they want it to be a nonprofit community center, okay, there aren't owners. It's owned by the congregation.
Well, I mean, you do
I just want to be
have-
clear, they have,
a master
correct,
deed.
they have,
They have
correct, I
rights.
just want to be clear,
Kind of like a
it'll be more of like an association. It'll be more like in my previous experience in other developments, it's usually an association that owns and controls that property. They may create, spin off and do a nonprofit that will run it.
For a second. We will have to craft a covenant, a resolution, not a.
I understand.
Let me finish. A recorded instrument that assures that the residents that are shown on A3 will have the controlling interest, however it's done, in this facility when it's completed.
Well, I just want the 1/150th, because I'm so unclear as to who the 1/150th are when the other two developments were only 40, that's why it's a little bit more
It's
complicated.
supposed to maybe serve more than A3, but that's for a different day. As far as the resolutions that have been brought up by Mr. Liston, I think this board's going to want to be assured that the representations that were made in those resolutions are fulfilled.
Those 40 purchasers get to own 150th share. And that's what this application is about anyway. So a requirement like that in the resolution makes sense. The other
I'm
100,
interested to hear what Mr. Liston has to say.
the other 110 shareholders are whoever the nonprofit entity brings
Well,
in.
was it supposed to be because there's more than 20 households, if they're duplexes and basement apartments? How many housing units are in the
Well-
two pink rectangles?
Well,
How many households?
in the two pink,
Yes.
well, there's 40 property owners, and there could be 40 basement apartments, but there was never a representation that the basement apartments get to 150th. It was clear each lot gets 150th. And then the separate nonprofit entity, they will apportion it in a way that makes sense, and it's really not the jurisdiction of
Mr.
the
Herzl,
planning.
Who retains ownership of it? That's a separate entity.
A separate nonprofit
If they want to
entity.
sell it, could
Well,
the property be
it
sold?
certainly should be restricted to a separate nonprofit entity, so they can't sell it to somebody who's going to turn it into something different.
Mr. Herzl, what my point is, in a conventional multifamily housing unit where you typically have a community center or one neighborhood. There's property rights to that community center. When you buy your house, you get shares to it. It's owned by that community, like a clubhouse in a condominium.
But the whole
You can't
community
sell.
owns that, 100.
Well, that's what I'm trying to establish, because I think that's what the intent was, that the members of that community would be able to use this facility for what their needs are.
Mr. Jackson?
One out of 150.
Well, I don't know how it got to 150.
I can explain that if anyone
As
wants
far
to
as the
listen.
jumping at the bit. Does the chair recognize the board secretary, please?
There were at least 2 other subdivision applications by very similar principles on other blocks in this immediate area. I believe there's 6 altogether, 6 blocks with 20 on each block, give or take, that are all being developed by several very similar developers or
So that's
similar
120.
interests. That's where the math came up to 120, which was increased to 150, probably just in an error, to err on the side of caution.
I think it came up to 110, because if you look in the minutes, it mentions 110.
So the point is, it's not going to go out of this neighborhood. This center will be to service this neighborhood, which is what I
Yeah.
think the board's concern was when this came out. They said, don't put this together in pieces, when if you had put it together as 120 units, you'd have to have a community center. That's how this all started.
Well-
And I think those provisions in the resolution were to try to accomplish that objective.
And again, you said if you did it all together, you'd be required to put a community center. There's no requirement
But
in the
there
Lakewood
is,
ordinance.
because it's in the resolution.
Yes, but you were saying you would have been required to. It's in the resolution because MNYK agreed to it because they were doing it anyway.
If it's more than 25 units, then you're required.
You're required to set
Mr.
aside
Klein-
5% open space.
Mr. Klein will like this, but he wasn't just doing it to be a mensch.
Well,
The board put pressure on him to do that. You need a variance.
And if you read the minutes, Mrs. Weinstein said they were doing it anyway. He wasn't doing it out of the goodness of his heart. He was doing it as a businessman because in order to sell the units, nobody's going to buy a unit if they have nowhere to
Like Mr. Jackson
rent.
said, it's in the resolution. We
Right.
gotta make sure
So,
yeah.
that's fulfilled.
Can I also just point out one other,
Members of
sorry.
the board, I'm sorry if I'm taking, I'm just trying to keep this focused.
And I think
We'd rather get it right.
It's a lot of legal issues over here, I don't think we know.
Well, I don't
So-
know.
Anyone who understands exactly.
Angela, help me out again.
Can I,
But, is
I
it,
just have, I actually have a legal question for you, John. If the SD 1998 resolution specifically states there has to be one of 150 shares sold, do they really have to come to amend that application then? Because
well, I think it could still be 150 shares. I think this is, I don't know, maybe some of the apartment members get a share. I don't think it goes outside these 4 resolutions and how the math works out. I think that can be resolved.
The other ones are
And maybe-
mentioned, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, the other,
Occupational people live in one household, maybe each one of them gets a share. I don't know how they'll work that out, but I think there has to be a deed restriction on this community center so that only those people in the 4 resolutions, somehow the shares have to be divided up so that they have control.
so John, just to be clear, the other 2 resolutions don't mention this.
Mr. Jackson.
It's not in there.
what do you mean the other 2 resolutions?
John's not saying it's, because I indicated this, how we got to the number. Those other 2 applications have no,
Oh, I thought you were talking about the ones that are not.
right, these 2 resolutions that we're talking about in the pink, we understand what it says, 1/150th, and we are going to have to comply with whatever that means. Our point is, again, I don't want to start saying, yes, the other 2 resolutions, I have to go back, look at those resolutions. Again, this applicant is here for the shul, 10,000 square feet.
I told you on record. So the 100 and the 150, as many ownerships you have, the rest retains ownership by Mr. Vogel, and he has a right to sell to the third entity.
The separate nonprofit,
He has a right to sell to them?
the 27% is going to go to the 2 pink ones. The remaining 73%, the separate nonprofit, can take in people that want to participate, and they have to pay a nominal fee. That's what was stipulated also.
We're going to have in the bylaws some kind of protection for minority shareholders, so that it has to be used, that they'll have to have some kind of veto power, because I don't want to have a 73% shareholder defeating the purpose of a community center for the first 2 by being able to outvote them.
But-
So we're going to have to be careful.
As Ali indicated, there's 110 lots approved. And in selling them, he's represented to the other ones that they're going to get this. So he's not holding on to the 73.
That's fine, but
I understand, but,
Yes.
I'm just saying,
I'm
we've
sure-
got to make sure there's an equitable
Yes.
protection.
We all agree.
and we'll just have to
So that
address,
the shareholders, their expectation, I think, was that this will be their house of worship for their neighborhood.
and again, just to be, sorry,
There's a reality to the composition of Lakewood. The shul is a very essential part of the neighborhood,
and just for legal purposes,
people get their shul.
I just want to be clear again, they're members, again, they're not actually ownership. As a nonprofit, I have to be clear, I don't,
The ownership is.
we will work it out in the resolution, I just want to be clear, because I can't have, someone's later on say, this is not
The
a,
interest is tied into your property.
yes, thank you. And I just want to clear up one other issue, only because, Brian, it goes back to the subdivision application. We did have a request for waivers not to improve Blanche and, and Columbus Avenue. We are no longer asking for those waivers, and we are improving those. Again, Brian mentioned this, that there would be 40-some on-street parking. That's how we're getting it. We're not asking for a waiver, we are improving all that.
The reason that you're approving it is because you want to have ample.
There will be more than sufficient, in our testimony, there will be more than sufficient parking in the event they decide to use the second floor as a second synagogue. We are not, a second community center, if they want to put a synagogue there, we will have sufficient parking between the on-site and the off-site.
Let's look at for just one thing. I think the resolution says clearly there'll be a 10,000 square foot building to be used. To be used, I think we have to give the parking for 10,000 square feet, which you are giving. I think we should be clear on the record that we have enough parking for both synagogues, if they're both main sections.
If that is the case, I just then would like to just ask for, I believe it's then a 10 parking space variance, just to be clear, if you're indicating that there's going to be two synagogues, a 5,000 and a 5,000, I have to ask for, as a cover under my caption.
I would suggest that there's nothing in the ordinance that prohibits using on-street parking. It doesn't say on-site parking, it says provide parking. So if we're going to say we need 46, we've provided 33 on-site, we have 13 on-street parking spaces that we're improving. So I don't think we even need relief. If the board thinks we need relief, well, then grant us that relief. I think the ordinance is clear.
You're not providing that parking, you're showing that it's available nearby.
Well, we are providing it in that it's a paper street that we're improving.
Oh, I see, but you're going to have to cover and get the governing body to issue permits just for that house of worship, which I don't think that's going to.
Well, we.
I mean, that's not.
Well, if we're gonna go on, technicalities, the technicality is very clear. The ordinance clearly says the secondary shul does not count. It's black and white.
So, Ron, your intent of developing that street is to give more parking?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, one question that hasn't been discussed, why does the applicant need the subdivision to develop those, 4 lots?
The applicant doesn't need the subdivision. He's entitled by the ordinance to the subdivision. He committed to providing a 10,000 square foot shul with parking and recreation, and he's doing that.
How will those 4 lots be used? What do you see being built there? What's permitted?
Duplex.
It's
Duplex.
it's two duplexes.
The subdivision, the two buildings.
I'm looking at the bottom one.
Duplex.
Okay, so the 4 individual lots is actually 4 individual units.
Correct.
Through the chair, are those residents, people that should be included, having the ability to?
Yes, and they will be.
Yes.
They absolutely will.
Anything that's included on the other ones, we agree to include them.
That's why there was 110, and it's made for 150.
So you envision that those residents will have one of the 100?
That's, absolutely, they wouldn't move there otherwise. So,
And as we've indicated, the 150 was more than sufficient. There were not 150 units that were delineated.
So Mr. Flanger, let me hear a summary of the variances that you need, if any.
0. We need relief for parking, 1 parking space within 5 feet of a residential property line. We're giving 33 where 23 are required. If the board doesn't want to grant that relief, then delete that parking space.
That's a fully
My
conforming.
testimony is that
It's a variance or waiver?
my testimony would be it's a waiver. And also the testimony is that it's to one of the new units. So the purchaser of that unit is going to know that the parking is there, so they're not being harmed. If they don't like the parking space that close, they don't have to buy the unit, and the whole neighborhood benefits from an additional parking space. It's only one parking space, but everyone helps. If-
Okay, anything else you want to add?
Well, I wanted to say on parking, something that always comes up, and it usually comes up right away, but this application is different, is catering in the basement. There's no catering in the basement.
We built on a slab.
No, there's going to be a basement where the congregants will congregate after services and stuff, the way it's done, but there's no catering. It's not a
So
hall.
you would agree to a restriction that it cannot be
Yes.
used for...
Catering facilities
Yes.
other than Sabbath and holidays.
And there's specific things...
No outside parties.
Yes.
Or members only.
All these same...
Kidding,
All these same requirements that are normally put in, and
Now, anything else about your variances or your proofs?
So again, on the subdivision, there are no variances. It's a variance-free subdivision. With regard to the site plan, you've heard testimony that, again, there is no synagogue, there is no parking requirement for any.
Before we move on to questions from the board, Mr. Vogt, do you have any comments about site circulation, ingress, egress, drainage, lighting, or any of the traditional site plan issues that the board should consider?
The comments that we have on those issues are all outlined in our review letter. It's my understanding that the applicant agrees in principle with complying with the comments.
we would
So that everything works. We're not going to have any site problems.
No, not to my knowledge.
we would agree to satisfy all of the engineer's comments.
That's on both reports?
Yes.
We have curbs and sidewalks around the whole thing?
Yes.
Yes.
Except for
Yes.
the back where there's no street.
And on Blanchard Street also?
Correct, curbs and
All three right-of-ways will be improved with curbs and sidewalks.
Full width, curb, sidewalks, both
Yeah.
sides.
Both sides?
Oh, no, what? We'll do curb on both sides, we're not doing sidewalk across the street.
We can't. It's somebody
develops-
else's property.
If
We
somebody
can't.
develops across the street, they'll do the sidewalk, but sidewalk all the way around
All
our...
right, Mr. Herzl, do you want to ask the board if any of the board members have any questions? The applicant,
They have a question. Please speak into the mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The extra parking space, can that be used as a safe place for kids to park bikes, dedicated place?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
wants to
you.
The
know.
extra space.
The extra parking space, instead of taking it out and put it like for a bike rack? A bike rack.
Oh,
can you put it on a different place on the site?
We have plenty of room for a bike rack.
We could put bike racks somewhere else and still get that spot.
It's probably a very good idea, and the applicant would agree to add a bike rack.
So we'll revise the plans to be submitted to the board engineer to show a bicycle.
Right, if the board acts favorably, we will certainly, as part of resolution compliance, provide bike racks adequate for the size of the
Consider
facility.
all schools, all schools.
Yes,
A lot
yes.
of kids come with bikes and they should have.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other board members have any questions? Mr. Ryan, do you have any questions? Anything? Okay.
I just don't remember anything about trash pickup or where the trash closure is going to be or anything. Where will all that be?
In this particular case, we'll meet with Public Works. Any approval will be subject to Public Works. The duplexes, it's very easy. They're going to put them behind, they're going to roll them out. I would assume the shul would do the same thing. They'd have the rollout cans in the back, and they'd roll them out to the
You
street.
submitted plans to show the appropriate pad and site for that, and it'll be near a door.
Well, if the board acts favorably, we would, as a condition of approval, meet with Public Works and add that to the plan. Wherever
Wherever
Public
they
Works
want.
tells us they want to pick them up.
That's okay with you?
Yeah, that's typically what's required for residential lots. My question is, and we're kind of jumping in between site plan and subdivision, how is trash being handled on the shul lot?
The intention would be that there'd be rollout cans behind the shul that would be rolled out to one of the streets wherever the Department of Public Works wants to pick them up.
All right, so you're not doing, if I can just ask, you're not doing a traditional trash enclosure?
We have not shown a trash enclosure. If Public Works wants a trash enclosure, we have plenty of room along Columbus Avenue to add a trash enclosure.
I think that you should show it because I know from other synagogues, and Mr. Franklin, correct me if I'm wrong, the township wants sometimes to pick up a big container, not a small roll-up.
We-
It depends on,
And we agree, and all we're saying is wherever DPW says where and how,
Yeah.
we agree.
and you have the room to.
We have room, yes.
Plenty of room.
If I can just add
One step at a
something.
time.
No, we're paving Columbus.
Oh, you're gonna pay?
Paving Columbus right to the end.
And
The
Blanche.
plans that were initially submitted, we asked for
For the
relief. That was a mistake. We corrected it at the last meeting. We're paving Columbus and Blanche all across the frontage, curb on both sides, sidewalk on our side, in front of the whole property.
We spoke about that, I recommend
Yes,
we should always meet DEP before.
yes, yes,
It
and,
makes it much easier to know what they want to make sure that it
Yes.
fits on the property.
yes. The one thing that I didn't put in my testimony was any proofs relating to relief. And I didn't do that because I don't think we need any relief, but there has been some suggestion that maybe we need relief. I would just like to add, if you look at the Lakewood Master Plan of 2007 on page 35, with respect to the housing, it says, Lakewood needs more housing. On page 56 of the same report, it says encourage growth and development in appropriate locations. And it's my testimony that this is an appropriate location. The duplexes fit good with the other development in the area, and the shul is an improvement that was actually requested by the other development. This is in the Cross and Prospect Street core, and it meets all the intents of the Cross and Prospect Street core, and the municipal land use law, NJAC 40:55B2, under the purpose of the act, it says to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of all lands in a state in a manner which will promote public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. And it's my testimony this does exactly that.
Thank you.
All right, we have to ask whether Mr. Liston has any questions.
But before that, any other question, any board members to Mr. Flannery or Mr. Franklin? Yes, anyone, okay, Mr. Liston?
Yeah, I just have a few questions for Flannery. Mr. Flannery, Lot 9 as it exists, assuming this application for subdivision was not granted. Lot 9,
Yes.
what's its size?
Please speak into the mic, you should be able to write.
What's the size of Lot 9 as it existed at the time of the developer's agreement and it exists today?
1.04 acres.
How many square feet is that?
1 acre is 4,356 square feet.
So how many total square feet in Lot 9 as it exists today?
About 44,000 square feet.
And how many square feet will exist in the new Lot 9 that you're attempting to create, which will be obviously less? How many square feet in that?
30,489.
Is that just the synagogue, and that's
30,000.
the
That's
recreation?
the orange lot.
Hold on, as well. Recreation, parking, and,
Yes.
Okay, so you are taking approximately 14,000 square feet out of this property. In the reduction of Lot 9, you're reducing Lot 9 from 44,000 square feet to 30,500 square feet. That calls for a yes or no answer.
No, it doesn't call for a yes or no answer. If you want to know the math, you can do the math yourself. There's
I'm not an
no,
engineer, I count on you for that.
There's no-
Maybe I shouldn't, huh?
Very straightforward. What's the size, how much is the difference between the lot that existed, Lot 9,
and new lot 9.05. Mr. Liston asked me the difference between the new lot and the old lot. The difference between the two numbers that I gave you was 14,000 square feet, just under 14,000 square feet.
Okay. How many parking spaces could you put in that 14,000 square feet if you had to?
I haven't done any sketches on that.
Well, can you give us an approximation?
It's not something that's material to the application. I haven't done.
I'm asking you to give us an...
He's asked and answered.
So you refuse to tell us how many parking
He's
spaces?
asked and answered. He's
Can I
not
finish the
refusing.
question?
He's asked and answered.
Gentlemen.
You understand, Mr. Chairman, what I'm asking.
Mr. Herzl.
Mr. Kaufman is shorting my client's... Klugman.
Mr. Liston, the witness said he doesn't know because it varies. You can ask another question. You were asking additional questions. He said
Right.
you could not answer. What's your next question?
My next question is, Is there any recreation site?
I don't mean to cut you off, because I think
Of
you're
course you
going to
do.
say, how many square feet, you know?
No.
No, I mean, your point is you could get more parking if you had.
You could get more
an additional 14,000 square
parking,
feet.
right,
And
and
Mr. Flannery, to be fair, just if you had to eyeball it, how many more parking spaces
Well,
are you talking about?
it depends on where the 10,000 square feet is and how it lays
What's the
out.
minimum you think you'd have?
I don't want to answer that question
You think
because,
you could get 10?
again, it's just guessing at a number.
But do you
If somebody,
think, Mr. Flannery, you're an architect, engineer, I know you see things instantly. Do you think you could get 10 more parking spaces if you had the other 14,000 square feet?
Well,
Without even trying?
now he's going to do the math for us. Thank you, Mr. Flannery.
I'll do the unnecessary math that Mr. Listman is looking for.
Mr. Jackson, if you just eyeball the parking spaces they have there and you duplicated that and turn it up there, you can probably get twice as many. I mean, it depends on how wide your access aisles are.
And Mr. Flannery's point is that this is not necessary, but I think it's a fair question of cross-examination.
And just to point out that none of the resolutions call for a certain amount of parking spaces. I don't, just,
The board might
I'm
consider
putting it on the
this
record.
relevant. Mr. Flannery seems to think it's
if the-
irrelevant. I don't know what the board's going to think, but I
If
think it's a fair
the,
question.
if the 14,000 square feet laid out nicely, that you didn't waste any land, you'd probably get another 20 parking spaces.
Okay,
Please continue.
thank you. Now, is there was some discussion of a park being required of one of the developers. You recall that?
I remember the resolution stating that the applicant should diligently try to work out with the town where he could build a park on public land that would be a public park.
Okay, but if he couldn't build a park on public land, wasn't he also committed to build a private park of some sort?
There's nothing in the resolution that says that. The application that's before you shows approximately 8,000 square feet behind the building where there'll be recreation for the children associated with the community center, which is typical of community centers in Lakewood.
Okay, so what you're saying is he's not going to build a separate park?
What I'm saying is if the township governing body agrees to identify 2 acres where he can build a park, he will build a park. And MNYK would be the entity that would have to demonstrate that they diligently tried to accommodate that and were unable to do.
Okay, so you're committing 8,000 square feet on the Shul property for recreation?
That is correct.
Okay. If you were to add some or all of the 14,000 square feet, you would get a park that would be about 22,000 square feet, isn't that correct?
If the layout was such
Right.
that it fit right in there, 8,000 plus 14 equals 22.
Okay, so instead of increasing parking, or increasing parking somewhat and giving some more property over to recreation, your client wants to build duplexes on the balance of the property, which won't be part of the old Lot 9. Is
Well,
that correct?
Since there's no requirement for him to use the entire old Lot 9. his
I disagree with that.
requirement is to build a 10,000 square foot shul.
We're going back and forth on whether, I don't know, we're going back and forth on whether this is relevant. Is there anything in the development agreement or the resolutions that says that the applicant must provide a park that's beyond that the applicant shall ask the governing body to provide a park?
There is language in the minutes that talks about a recreational area or park being provided by the applicant.
Does it say a size?
Because what the applicant will make a diligent effort to acquire land from the township to develop a park that can be owned by the township.
I think, now that's in the resolution? Or the minutes?
Yes.
In the minutes, there is some discussion of a park not
The
being,
resolution, that's a specific thing in the resolution. So my question to you is there anything in the resolution or as a condition in anywhere that says the applicant has to provide it as opposed to asking the township to?
I can't answer that right now without going back over all the minutes that I have in my file, but I would say this. There have been representations made to my clients, which you'll hear about later this evening, about a park being provided by the developer.
I think as far as this board is concerned, though, that Mr. Flannery's objection, I think Mr. Pfeffer was nodding along, that it's irrelevant is, I think there's a point to that. I think you've made your point, you've developed the issue, so let's...
Right, and just so I'm clear, this property, according to my interpretation of the developer's agreement, was all supposed to be devoted to the community, all of it, the whole old
You
Route,
said that.
Lot 9.
Please question the, finish your cross-examination.
Okay, that's not being done, I think that was my last question. He is taking part of the old Lot 9 and building duplexes on it for profit, is that correct?
I presented the application, it's perfectly clear.
That's what the application shows?
That's what the application...
Fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Flanagan.
On the end of Columbus Avenue, you're gonna put the garbage out, and you need to turn around.
Yes, I noticed that also. So certainly we're going to meet with Public Works, and whatever Public Works says is the appropriate terminal situation there, we would accommodate that.
And you have room for turnaround?
Yes.
That's okay.
The thing is, you pick it up on the right side.
Yep.
Any other questions from any board members?
They would probably want to pick it up on Blanche, so they don't have to go down.
I think it'd be easier for them to put it out.
And whatever's easier.
Whatever they want, we will agree.
Okay, I will open to the public now. Anybody from the public would like to hear, please come forward. Please state your name and record.
I would like to cross-examine the,
Are you represented by Mr. Liston?
no.
Did you identify who your clients were?
Yes, I did, in a letter to Ally, all 41
Okay,
families
so-
with addresses.
The people who are represented by Mr. Liston will go through Mr. Liston, they don't come up.
Well, I'm just gonna,
If you call them as a witness, that's your prerogative, but they
yeah,
can't come up.
I intend to call every one of them that is here tonight and ask him to come up and state his or her objections.
Certainly your right to do that, but...
I have to call them all by name? Is that what you're saying?
The ones who...
They're members of the public, they have a right to speak.
They're represented by counsel.
Yeah, but the only requirement that entails is they can't cross-examine. They can make their own statements, I don't have to call each one
Well,
of them.
if they come up and...
I mean, if you want to play rule games with me, that's fine, but I don't think that's the law.
Sir, please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the testimony will be before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I affirm.
State your name.
Baruch Blaustein, 28 Empire Lane. I'd like to cross-examine the witnesses.
Hold on, please.
Oh, yeah. Baruch is B-A-R-U-C-H. Blaustein is B-L-A-U-S-T-E-I-N.
And your address?
28 Empire Lane.
Okay, Flannery, Ms. Jones, any questions for you?
I would like to limit the public to 4 minutes, please.
Cross-examination, I don't have a time limit.
He can cross-examine them.
Okay. Okay.
But is it possible to stop the clock?
They never enforce that. Just don't tell them.
Okay. Number one, I live to the north of the subject property, 445, Lot 9.
You show it?
Yes.
Show the public.
This is one big development prospect on 445, Lot 1.46. Arshel is on Lot 1.54, and it includes this whole area. There's a park on here as well.
Let me ask you, your house is not within any of the other resolutions we were speaking about before? No, that's on top?
Well, I mean, this one is right here, this one is on the side of us.
Okay. Okay, continue.
Okay, so the southern border of our property of Lot 1.54, which is to the north of the subject property, is a 609-foot property length. That's not including Lot 1.53, which is like around another 100 square feet. The whole, I would say probably 80% of that has a retaining wall. Again, my estimate, it's around 15 feet tall. I would like to know if any engineering studies have been done on the effects of the subdivision and removing the trees, etc., to that retaining wall.
No.
Is that something that's required, or?
No.
No, it's not required, and the plans get submitted to the planning board engineer, and it's your retaining wall is a very normal retaining wall that was built to the property line, and I'm familiar with the retaining wall because we did that subdivision application, and houses that are built to the setback from there are going to cause no problem for that retaining wall.
Now, if it's not safe to build, then the engineer will pick it
Well,
up. Or the building department.
Right, if the town engineer feels differently, then there would be studies done, but there's nothing unusual about this. It's a little unusual for Lakewood, because Lakewood's pretty flat, but as engineers, we work all over the state, and there's places where this is done all the time, because it's in some of the northern areas where the properties go up and down.
Now, I know that this, the site plan subdivision has been modified, but originally, when they were requesting additional lots, there was discussion about needing a undisturbed buffer of 20 feet. I don't see it mentioned anymore. I don't know exactly what change that would cause that not to be needed. I just wanted to know what, you know, why that is not required anymore. Or maybe you're fulfilling it, I don't know.
But there's a perimeter buffer that's required. This shul now is 80 feet from their property. I think this is a layout that certainly respects those neighbors to the north more than the original application. And there's nothing in that 20 feet between the property line. There's no structures, so there's no relief that's required. There is relief that's mentioned in Terry's report with respect to the new duplexes, with respect to a perimeter buffer, and the plans show a fence along there, which meets the intent of that, and there's new buyers that are going to see that, and again, it's for buyers if they don't want to live that close to the shul, there's other lots for them to buy.
So, the fact that the trees will be torn down, number one, there will be a park, from my understanding of what was represented, will be over there. Number two, and then there will be at least one or two houses. I would say at least one would probably be within that 20-foot buffer. That's, you know, those are not something that you have to calculate with regard to that 20-foot undisturbed buffer?
The house does not have a buffer requirement, it's only the shul. And the shul is leaving 20 feet that they're not putting any structures on, and that complies with the ordinance. And if you look at, I think Al even has the Google Earth up, that recreation area is backing up to your recreation area and your shul. So even prior, when the building was closer, it certainly would have been my testimony that no buffer was required, but the buffer is being provided here because there's no structures within that 20 feet.
So, just to clarify, so a buffer you're allowed to tear down the trees and the buffer just means no structure?
Perimeter buffer means no structures, yes.
Okay. Now, back to what was discussed with regard to parking, how you testified that everything was conforming. First, I had one question. Originally, in one of the original reviews, again, when there were the property was being subdivided into more lots, there was mention in the engineer's report or the review that the main sanctuary will be 3,248 square feet. Now, the report is saying 2,834, and what I see the difference in the languages is that the first one is going by the actual square footage of the sanctuary. The second one is referencing to a number in parentheses that says usable. Could you explain what the difference is and why is it that usable is what we calculate? We should probably go with the main number.
Well, the sanctuaries for Lakewood shuls are always calculated on the usable area that's for the sanctuary. Any items where nobody's going to use them aren't counted in that calculation.
You don't need parking for that. If it's not
Right.
usable, you can't,
Right.
you don't need parking.
Exactly.
So how do you calculate what's usable and what's not, number one? And number two, how is is this something that's specified in the UDO
Well, the UDO says you use the main sanctuary. The architect puts a figure on of the area of the main sanctuary, and the planning board engineer reviews it.
I understand, but the usable part is also part of the architect?
You're arguing with them, asking questions.
I'm trying to understand.
Just ask questions. It's cross-examination.
Okay.
I think I answered you. If it's usable, people can stay there, you can have more people.
And that's something that's specified in the UDO?
It says usable.
And that's up to the engineer or whatever, the architect to decide?
You're cross-examining the witness, ask the witness.
Oh, okay.
Usable is known as the main sanctuary.
Okay. Has you yourself, any professionals of this applicant, of the other ones, MNYK, or all the others that have been involved, represented to this board that this community center will be used as a shoal?
The application this evening is for a show. I don't know what anybody else has represented. You're asking questions on my testimony. This is
Flannery, answer the
for
question,
approval as a
let's move
show.
on.
No, the reason why I'm...
Applications for a shul.
Right,
That's the next question.
Okay, because it was mentioned that, the parking would be dependent if it's a community center, if it's a shoal. So, it's a shoal, okay. Now,
I think we said before, community center needs much less parking.
Correct, that's what, just be clear.
right, that's what I'm
testimony-
saying, so that's why I'm asking, if it's a shoal, that would require more, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Use whatever you want, but they're giving the parking for a show.
Okay, fine.
That's
Now,
what the testimony.
now, next question is that you mentioned that you only, I think you said 23 parking spots, is that correct?
That's what 23 parking spaces is what the ordinance requires, and that's also indicated in the planning board engineer's report.
Okay. Could you explain to me how that number was calculated? Because according to what I see in the UDO, it says that...
Just explain how you came up with the 23 spaces, that's the question. Which
Uh,
I think was already asked and answered, but do it again.
0 to 800 square feet, no parking is required. From 800 to 2,000, one parking space is required for each 100 square feet. So the first, if you have a 2,000 square foot building, you need 12, and above 2,000 square feet, it's one parking space per 1.25. So the extra 800 times 1.25 plus the 12 comes to 23 parking.
I have no idea if that's correct or not, because I have no way to keep up with that.
And we're providing 33.
I'm not sure if this is a question for professionals, it's a public comment, but I just want to know if that's how there is legal interpretation.
Yes.
But my question is more the interpretation of the UDO, that you don't just take the total number. If it's 2,000 to 2,999, you should just calculate the 1.25, which would, according to my calculation, up it to 36, which would mean they're already over.
No, we break it up. First 800 and up to 2,000.
Okay. Now, with regard to the plan showing that the second floor is the secondary sanctuary over there, and therefore no parking is required, I have a question because you yourself and Mrs. Weinstein, who was the attorney at the time of application SD 1997, clearly said that this was going to be a show, and you clearly, Mrs. Weinstein, at the end of all the back and forth, so it wasn't, something that was just mentioned, she said, Mrs. Weinstein said, the applicant agrees, it says 26 COs, okay, I'm sorry, I was dropped before that, I'm sorry. Ms. Weinstein said that there are about 40 contracts on this property, and the potential buyers have all raised this issue of the shoal. They have promised a shoal that is going to be sufficient to have enough seats to fit one member from the upstairs and the basements of each. They have also promised 2 floors so that there could be 2 separate sanctuaries. So why is it now that we're saying a secondary and therefore it doesn't require parking? It was clear in the testimony of the professionals back then that there will be 2 shoals. And
The plan shows 2 shoals. One is the primary, one is the secondary, and we've provided a total of 68 parking spaces when you count the on-street parking spaces.
okay.
It's in both parking, it's spoken for.
Right, well, if you calculate them both as primary, my understanding would be, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the second shoal would require another 48, because you're already up to the next level. You're not starting over the 0 to 800 does not require any parking.
That's your comment, it wasn't a question, please continue.
Okay. So again, I'm trying to understand. So your opinion is that you can have a requirement for shoal, or it was agreed upon that there'd be 2 shoals, and still, instead of doing it 2 separate buildings or something, you're doing it 1 building, so therefore one is considered secondary, and therefore it does not require any parking.
Is that a yes or a no?
Yes.
Okay. One more question. Why is it that we're counting the second sanctuary, the sanctuary, which is the secondary one, which is a larger square footage, is 3,600, whatever, if you're using the usable, it's 3,164, versus that what you're calling the primary is the 2,834. Wouldn't it be logical that the larger one should be the primary?
I think they have outdated plans, because the plans I showed both plans the same.
Okay, maybe I do. I had from the last meeting. Okay, I didn't realize that. What other modifications then were done to this? The whole show layout was modified? Because I didn't realize that there was any modifications that were done to this plan since the last meeting.
But that wasn't done since the last meeting. The last meeting, I had architectural plans which showed two 5,000 square foot floors with identical shul sizes on both.
Okay, I guess I missed that, fine. Okay, so I guess I'm done with my cross-examination, but I wanted to make public comments as well.
Comments throughout that too, this was your chance, if you have any other comments, what are they?
Okay, so my comments are, it's going to get a little technical, but with regard, number one, I do want to put on the record that in the developer's agreement, besides for what was discussed in the resolution, it does say very clearly, in addition, developers shall construct a community center, which was mentioned, within 1,000 feet of the subject property, which shall be located on block 445, lot 9, as well as a recreation area that will be located within 1,000 feet of subject property. So here it doesn't say anything about diligent, here it says that it will be there. I'm reading from the developer's agreement dated December 15th, 2016. This is on page 2 of the agreement in section 1.1.
Doesn't say size.
It doesn't say a size, but it says there will be one, meaning it's not just a diligent, and it says within 1,000 feet. Now, additionally, I know that it was discussed, Mr. Flannery said his opinion is that the way he understood the resolution, lot 9 is not limited only to the shoal, they can also subdivide. As a technicality, this applicant is asking to rename the lots, and the shoal lot will be 9.05, so technically it's not lot 9 anymore. So it's technicality. I don't know if that's something that would have to be modified for the board to approve it. Also, with regard to the statements that said that this property was purchased by Mr. Krupnik, I do want to put on the record that if you look through the original deed, Mr. Krupnik won it in the bid. He assigned it to Baruch Birnbaum, who then assigned it to the Prospect Street Holdings LLC, so it was never deeded over to Mr. Krupnik himself. So it went straight from the Township Committee to the applicant. Additionally, what was mentioned that the applicant deeded it over to Buckwald LLC or something like that. I'm pretty sure when I looked on the records, there's even a different deed after that that's showing it went to Lakewood LLC or something like that, which has even a different principal. It mentions a Mr. Schefter over there. And the last comment on that is that I know, again, it was mentioned that if the applicant didn't own it, how can it be put into the resolution? And especially if there was no deed restriction when the township put it up for sale or anything like that. My point is, though, if the township owned it at the time when the application SD 1997 came before the board, and that's when the developer's agreement, was put into SD 1997 rather, put in that there will be a developer's agreement. So that kind of means the township at the time agreed that they would let them use it for a show, or that's what I would deduce. And from the fact that the township then went ahead and signed the developer's agreement also kind of shows that they're willing to allow it to be a show. So the township was the owner at the time, and the township did not object. That's all I have to say.
Okay, can I ask a few questions of the objector? So you indicated that you lived in the subdivision to the north?
Correct.
Approximately how many units is part of that subdivision?
50, around.
50 units, give or take. Okay. And are you the only member here from that development tonight?
I don't know. If you want, I can look around. I'm not.
So maybe one or two?
The board should know that numerous came, but this is like the 6th or 7th hearing for this application. They came in mass the first few times, but unfortunately, most residents tend to fizzle out, and it's a problem that applicants either use to their benefit or it works out to their benefit, unfortunately.
So, but you're the only one here from that development? More or less. Okay. Approximately how large is the synagogue that's in that development?
I think it's around 2,000 square feet, the main sanctuary around.
So the main sanctuary, is there a secondary sanctuary?
There's the ladies section upstairs. I don't know if you consider that and
there
it's a
is-
much smaller room, not like this, they're two.
So you have a 50-unit subdivision, give or take, with, I'm assuming, basement units?
Correct.
Okay, so approximately 100 families?
Correct.
Okay, in a, you said approximately 2,000 square foot sanctuary?
Correct.
Okay, and does it suit the needs?
It's tight, but
Okay, and the applicant tonight is proposing a 10,000 square foot sanctuary, is that correct?
not 10,000 square feet.
10,000 square foot building, right?
Right, meaning around 7,200, what I'm understanding, usable will be less. And by the way, the applicant's foreman told me that the way you guys calculate space in the sanctuary per person is 11 square feet per person, which would bring us up to around 627 people between the two sanctuaries, which kind of shows that, I don't know what they have in mind. I know it's at 150, but it can hold a lot more.
So there's a 50-unit subdivision, 100 families that are in a 2,000 square foot sanctuary at the moment?
Correct.
Okay. Now, are you a buyer of any of the units that are part of that, the 150th that have been
No,
referenced?
no.
Okay. So what is how is this subdivision going to specifically affect you?
Okay, the answer to that is that unfortunately, everybody keeps on saying, Mr. Flannery said that this is all in conforming, the use is in conforming with the plan for the area and the use of the area. Unfortunately, it's not. I know that yes, on the map it looks like it and everything, and the other approvals that you guys already got, are this, but there's another development further up Prospect to the west.
It's not a part of this application,
No,
though.
I understand, but you want to know how it's affecting me.
Yes.
It's because of the increase in traffic. There's probably already been, on Prospect Street, in this triangle, there have probably been another, I'm going to say, the other development probably has 100, 150 units, and then we're getting over here another 150. Traffic is already a disaster.
So I don't mean to cut you off, I'm asking, is the issue then the two duplexes? Because if it was just a synagogue, you would still have the same, the other units are there. I'm trying to understand them, but how exactly, I'm not sure if you're objecting to the two duplexes, or you're objecting to the synagogue, the community center, or you're objecting to the entire, in this entirety?
I'm actually, I'm waiting for the synagogue. I actually want it there. I am objecting to the duplexes and the parking that will be diminished because of it, because if you look on Sunset, you'll see that Rabbi Gissinger Shul over there has like 60 spots in his parking lot, and still the whole Sunset from beginning to end, or at the busy times during the week, is full of parking. So I'm afraid that's going to be all the surrounding streets and Prospect Street.
And did you hear the additional testimony that indicated that they're going to be creating 2 new streets and adding approximately 40 more off-site parking?
I heard that, and, as was mentioned, it's not reserved for the shul, so.
I didn't say it was reserved,
if there's
but
any
we're creating.
development- I understand, but if there's any development that's gonna go up on the other parcels of land around here, people will use this. If there's gonna be some sort of recreation, people will come for that park. And just like I mentioned, 60, even if there would be 60 spots, or whatever, with the Wall Street 60 spots, if you go look, you'll see on Sunset that it's almost covered. Unfortunately, the UDO doesn't require more, but it doesn't suffice. So if you have 60 or 70, it's not going to cut it.
So your objection?
Through the chair, how many parking spots does your current shul have?
Our development has head-on parking. If I remember correctly from the plans, there's 4 point, I understand, but I want to explain why it's
Just
affected.
answer the question, how many does the shul have?
There's 4.7 per unit, so it bleeds over. I don't know. As I'm trying to tell you, I don't know. I think it's around 15, but being that there's 4.7 per unit, it's bleeding over. The whole retaining,
All right, you've answered
this
the
whole
question.
wall is no parking, there's no houses on this, so this is all empty parking,
Yeah,
and this is
sir.
as well.
Sir, please continue. And Mr. Becker, you finished?
I'm sorry, and just my point is, so it sounds like the objection is to 2 duplex units. That's not going to create.
Mr. Flansbaum puts up a good point, and I apologize, sir.
I don't think we need to interrogate.
I'm not, I don't think I'm being.
I want to clear on the record what my business, I'm happy.
I'm not
please.
interrogating, I believe I'm just asking a question. He asked, I said he had an objection, he said he had no objection to answering them.
A lot of questions for everybody.
No, I'm happy, please, I'd love to clarify, and many questions people have.
Okay, I feel like it's an app.
No, I'm happy to answer them.
It's all right to find out what exactly, I'm trying to get to what the concern is. I believe he's answered it, and we can move on.
Okay, thank you very much for the comments. Anybody else?
Oh, one last thing, I just wanted to say to answer his question. Also, with regard to what's being discussed about the public works with the garbage, that's definitely going to remove some of those, it's going to limit those off-street parkings, because those garbage cans are going to be there at some point. There's going to be a garbage truck there, which, I don't know how it's going to work out with that. So, yes, there will be times where you'll have that, but there will be times where you won't.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else in the public like to please come forward?
You can also ask questions of the witnesses.
Okay, please state your name and record.
Ms. Balfour, another 13 Lewin.
Raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony given before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Confirm.
Spell your name, please.
R-A-P-H-A-E-L, last name is F-R-E-U-N-D,
And your address.
13 Lewin Avenue.
When do you live over there?
Oh,
You show
yeah.
them out?
Right.
I don't, Lewin Avenue, I don't believe is on this map at all.
Is that on the map? Okay. You're not looking for 100 square feet.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to say that right now we have a temporary shul, and with obviously not even everybody's in there yet, and you should see the parking going on there. You see everybody's driving the shul. So this thing that Mr. Flanagan is saying is that people are walking doesn't seem to be the fact, because right now, let's look at what's going on. Not what could happen. There is actually, I think we see a lot of cars. So, first of all, people are driving, definitely people are coming to shul by car for whatever the reason. Another 2 points I wanted to raise is that I agree with what was previously said, that we need every single parking spot. Obviously, you walk around, you go to other shuls and you see how it's so congested and there's not enough spots. So I don't see any reason that we should be giving waivers for the 10 spots that are so badly needed, because we really need much more than that. And one last comment I'd just like to say is that I spoke to Mr. Klugman, I believe, 2 weeks ago Friday, and he said the number one thing he wouldn't negotiate on is, he said he wants to own the shul, and that's the way he wants. He didn't explain exactly clearly why. He said that he has things he.
Conversation you had with someone when you would negotiate, that's hearsay.
I'm sorry?
That's hearsay.
Why is it, he's making it clear to me. He's making it clear to me as a buyer that he's not willing to give over the shul. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm sorry?
We're not allowing the hearsay.
And we've already stipulated.
You're saying, he's not, he'll say this in public. He said this to all of us.
Please move on.
Okay. Oh.
And we've indicated before we would work in the event that,
So I'm just saying, we're very concerned about that, because we're hearing about it being resold from some sources.
You can't sell it. You won't sell it.
Right, we just want to make sure that it's put on the record.
It has to be.
Okay, we just want to make sure it's put on the record. And that's
That's
all.
between the attorneys.
You heard me make the comments that we're going to put, and you heard when I brought it up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm just saying, it's a really serious concern, because it's,
And I think our attorney took it very seriously.
no, I appreciate that. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public would like to be heard, please come forward. Please state your name for the record.
Represented by Mr. Liston.
Yes.
Mr. Liston, you want to present your witness and ask him questions?
Yeah, can you put your name on the record, please?
David Hertz,
And where do you live, Mr. Hertz?
141 Pressburg Lane.
Do you swear affirm testimony given before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I affirm.
How many of your witnesses do you intend to call, Mr. Liston?
How many people are here that I represent who want to testify? Raise your hands, please, right now.
The thing is,
One more.
Mr. Liston,
What?
as you know, the chairman has the ability to limit testimony that's duplication, that's unnecessary, and go over the same things over and over. And I know you have a lot of people, you respond to letterhead, but we don't need to hear 40 people say the same thing, as you know. So unless your clients have something to add that you haven't said, the board could really not use that time to hear the same thing over and over. So if you have 40 clients and you want to...
I don't have 40 clients here, Mr. Jackson, and I can tell you that probably one or two others will testify, and it'll probably take less time than what you're saying right now. So could we get started?
You're accusing me of that.
Turnabout's fair play, Mr. Jackson.
Fair enough.
Mr. Hertz, can you tell us what your objections are and what...
Under oath, I forget.
Yeah, you did.
Affirmation, thank you.
Where do you live? Show the...
He already said that, but go ahead. Where do you live, Mr. Hertz?
My car, I don't know, my proposed is, I believe,
Are you on this map?
yeah,
it's a contract purchaser.
Will you not interrupt my client, Adam? Just shut up, okay?
Yes, don't tell me to shut up then. You want to tell me to be quiet? Be quiet. Don't tell me to shut up.
You chime in all the time, Mr.
The king of it.
I don't think any of us should.
Please, Mr. President, please continue.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Jackson, for your concern. That is a very, very strong concern for all of the purchasers, both present and not, regarding the shul, hearsay or not, but there's very, very strong reason why that is a concern. And I just would mention that you had made the point that there's 120 shareholders, and then they made the point that it's really only 40, and the other ones could be outsourced. The original, because he said that, Mr. Pfeffer said that only 40 are in the resolution. The reason that resolution was enacted was because the previous 40 were understood to have been sort of cheated out of that resolution, which should have been. So thankfully for Mr. Schmuckler and other people, the board later, better late than never came, but the resolution is clearly referring to all of the purchasers before and after, that they are to be protected by that thing. So we appreciate your concern.
That aren't in the two pink rectangles, you're in a different property?
I'm in the pink rectangle, yes.
Okay. So you believe that, how do we do that? Because the shareholders in those two properties put money away in an escrow. So their money.
I know all about that.
Do a mechanism to bring in the other people and have that fair for the people.
I didn't understand that.
I mean, the people who did not give the share fare.
What I'm saying is that I think it was $10,000 per unit that each of the homeowners, like yourself, put into escrow.
So I would just clarify that
Bill,
I didn't put any money into escrow. The board obligated the money that I put. We all put the same down payment, 10% into escrow. So it was he put into escrow. I understand, but you understand my agreement with my down payment was not any different than anybody else's down payment.
I agree with that, but
So-
the developer put up the share, which, believe me, was built into your price. So
Obviously.
the question is, how do we equitably let in other people who...
You don't need to let them in. You just need to let the
How does
other people don't not let them in.
What do you propose, how does the developer screen the entrance to the other...
He protects the current developer just by not outsourcing it and taking it over by another entity from that
You're saying it should be people in the adjoining...
Yeah, exactly like you said, Mr. Jackson. I just wanted to make sure because there was a point where you stated this, what I said, and then Mr. Pfeffer came in and said that it's only the 40 who have that protection. And I'm just reiterating that it's not these 40 that have the protection. The protection was enacted at the resolution for these 40, but it was enacted for the purpose of all of the previous residences also.
I think one of the questions asked is the duplexes would be subject to that.
100%, and obviously all future up to 150 would be, okay, that's, so one thing is clear. The other point, just two more points quickly, that regarding the parking, it is my position, and I believe, I don't know how many people are going to speak, the position of the other buyers, present and future, in contract and already closed, that the parking, the Columbus Street, which is being proposed and being offered as parking. When they say that they're going to come down over here, with the garbage and all that, is since it abuts other land, which we don't know what its future will be, cannot be considered as being providing ample parking. Besides that it's not provided, but even as a fig leaf type of thing, it can't be construed as parking which is being provided. So the shul does not control that parking. So it could be developed, it could be used for other things. So being that, I think the only thing that one could fairly consider as being provided, parking being provided, is the actual on-site parking for the shul, especially since other people, if a person is making a upsharing or some party, a birthday party in his house, and he could use the street parking, it's available, it's not controlled by the shul. So it's not like the developer is meeting his parking obligations by saying, oh, there's parking on the street, right? Because that parking doesn't belong to the shul can't control it. So if the shul has an event, then we can't say, oh, the shul has ample parking for its needs. Ample parking means it owns ample parking, right? Just like you don't say that when a person has a neighbor who's a winter bird and he winters in Florida, so he could build his own house without... Okay, my third point is it says Mr. Blaustein cited this, in addition, developer shall construct a community center within 1,000 feet of the subject property that's in the, and which will be in block 44, lot 9, as well as a recreation area that will be located within 1,000 feet. I think the intent is pretty clear that the recreation area is in addition to the community center on block 9.
You're repeating the point that Mr. Liston made. Please move on.
There's an additional.
I haven't summed up yet.
I agree, but you made that exact same point.
There's an additional, I'm just reiterating that it's the position of all of our.
Please stop harassing these people, Mr. Jackson. There's only a few more left.
That is, those are my 3 points.
And
The
sir, I don't mean any
ownership.
disrespect, but your attorney made these exact same points, so we,
No problem. The one point that I wasn't, there was a little bit of fog on the issue of whether the other people not in those 40 are subject to the protections, and you made that point. It sounded like Mr. Pfeffer had sort of, was trying to throw a little bit of mud on that. I just wanted to clarify that we're all entitled to that protection. And I thank you very much, Mr. Jackson, because we appreciate it. Okay.
Anybody else in the public like to be heard, please come forward. Seeing no one, we'll close it to the public.
It's not one way.
Okay. I'll open up the public for the last person.
Again, I would just ask if he's one of Mr. Liston's clients, he just.
Please state your name for the record.
Lydia Tegano. Lydia Tegano.
Can you spell your last name?
My last name Kaganoff.
Is he one of Mr. Liston's clients?
I do believe so.
please raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony I'll give before this board is the truth, all truth, and nothing but the truth?
I affirm.
You're represented by Mr. Liston?
I don't believe so.
What's your address?
25 Miss Town.
25 what?
I'm taking 25 Miss Town.
Okay, sir, what,
Over there? Okay. Okay.
What are
Please
your-
speak into the mic.
There are 2 points I'd like to make. First point I'd like to make is that while the original agreement was that we're talking about only these 4 units, the shul's for these 40 houses, units, it was clearly that it will be in future agreements, future resolutions will be including the additional houses that already have been up on Prospect. There's an additional 40, these 2 blocks over here, which are not being included, was sold together and was clearly going to be included in this, and he's not including those in the 40 that we have clearly part of the development and clearly part of the, should be taken into account, and it was supposed to be, and it should have been in future included into as part of the representative for this shul.
Please don't scream for the audience.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
The second point was that I'm having a hard time understanding that if the purpose of, if he had to, based on the resolution that he's going to put a 10,000 square foot shul for us, and he is choosing to do it 5,000 on top of 5,000, doing it on top of each other, that's almost like we are allowing him to use the other properties from something else, and now instead of having the proper parking, the parking, as if we had 2 separate 5,000 square foot shuls, now all of a sudden we are allowing him to obviously save a lot of money keeping those lots to himself so we have to sell it, and now he's only providing us parking for 5,000.
I think originally he only stipulated that he's going to make the one building 10,000 square foot, 5,000 upstairs, 5,000 downstairs. That's what was said originally, so I heard tonight. And his testimony that he's giving parking, but that's up to the board to decide. Thank you very much for your comments. Anybody else for public wish to be heard? Seeing no one, we'll close it to the public.
I would like to ask Mr. Pfeffer a question. Sir, are you about to get up and say something?
We'd have to.
Well, he was getting up. Sir,
I'm being represented, yeah.
you're being represented. Do you have anything to add that Mr. Liston hasn't already argued?
Joseph
Needs to
Wilhelm.
be sworn and give his name.
Joseph Wilhelm. Last name is Wilhelm.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you give before this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Do you have anything to add that hasn't been raised or
I
presented
guess
by Mr. Liston?
I can say what I want to say, and you'll tell me if it's extra, I guess. But I do want to
Tell
mention
us where you live.
on 1 Lewin. 1 Lewin is in the development. It's on, I guess you know exactly, you heard the name, Lewin, you know pretty much.
And just for the record, we have, this is number 1 and 2 tonight on the calendar with, it went up to 16 originally, three or four of them have been knocked off. So there's a lot of applications behind us. It's almost 9 o'clock, we've been going to 6. So that's why we try to not duplicate things. It's not like we don't want to hear the case and the whole case, but it's not good for anybody.
I agree, I just want to finally settle.
Complain, well, you've been here 3 or 4 times, the developers do that, well, there's going to be people here tonight who are going to go home and not be reached. So please just try to, and I think you're being cute before when you said, well, tell me if there's anything Mr. Liston says. You know what he said, you're sitting right behind him in the front row. What do you have to add that wasn't said by Mr. Liston?
So I do want to mention what you just mentioned before regarding the, just mentioned that regarding the parking, you had the secondary shul, the first shul, and the secondary shul. The 10,000 square feet was given, and 5,000 square feet on each floor. It's pretty much the fact that you're able to put on 2 levels. You need all the reason why you have 10,000, the number is given 10,000 is to reflect all the buyers that are 150 houses, which would have double from upstairs and downstairs, which would be 2 for a house, 4 for a house, around 600 people. It's reflected in the upstairs and downstairs that is needed. Upstairs 2,800 and downstairs 2,800 is all needed in order to have sufficient parking for everybody in the building. That would be my point on that. And I'm not sure you're talking about the park now, or that's not part of it.
Anything raised, anything new that your attorney hasn't argued?
So I may have, okay, that will be one thing I would want to mention. And I guess.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll close it to the public now. Mr. Pfeffer, do you have any closing arguments?
Usually you let the objector go first.
Okay.
Do you have any case you wanted to bring? Do you
Yes,
have any experts?
No. Nope.
And one of the things I'm going to ask Mr. Pfeffer when you're finished is how he proposes to offer the 150, who's tracking, it's 100, 150, or 100. Who will be eligible to get those shares if the board
Well.
approves it? So I don't know if you want to hear that first.
No, I don't. I want to argue that first, please.
Okay, go ahead.
You called me up and asked me to argue, I'm going to argue. Thank you.
Not with me.
No, God forbid I should ever argue with you, John. Okay, here's the problem. The problem is that Mr. Klugman decided to try to circumvent the ordinances of this town by using separate little entities to do his separate little developments. And you caught him, and you stopped him. And you said, no. You can't beat these people out of a community-centered shul and out of a park by doing it that way. You're going to have to put them in. He didn't do this out of the goodness of his heart. He did it because you made him. And now what I'm asking you to do is to make him live up to his undertakings. His undertaking was, in accordance with the contract he entered into with the town, all of Lot 9 in Block 445 had to be used for the shul. And now he comes in and he says, well, it didn't really say that. The park got pushed aside altogether. Here's what I'm going to make my argument real short. I'm going to ask you to turn down the subdivision because it violates what he promised to do for these people. I'm going to ask you to require that he come back with a redesigned Lot 9, the old Lot 9, the larger Lot 9, redesigned to provide a little more recreation and as much more parking as he can. And I'm also going to ask that you require him as a condition of any approval you give on the shul. Hopefully you're going to turn down the subdivision because he's trying to take back from these people what he promised them and what he promised you and what he promised the township. I'm going to ask that you require that he stop this deed game he's playing, which we heard from one of your members who looked it up on her iPhone, and put the Lot 9, the shul property, back into the name of either his company, the applicant, or alternatively into a homeowners association, which he can control until he is more than 50% sold out of the 150 units, at which time control has to pass to the homeowners. That's the way. I've been doing this a long time. I have represented developers. That's exactly what happens. The clubhouse and the amenities are controlled by the developer until a certain amount of units are sold, and then control reverts to the homeowners, and the developer has no more say. Now, you heard, it was hearsay, and I heard this from clients, that Mr. Klugman is trying to pull a little bit of a scam to be able to sell the shul in the community center and get his money back out of it. That is a message to you guys that I am asking you to make sure he can't do. That would be, in my view, beyond the pale. So what I'm asking you to do is, very simply, turn down the subdivision, make him use the whole Lot 9 as it exists under the contract with the town for purposes of the community center, parking, and some recreation, and make sure that before the ink is dry on any approval you give him for the shul and the community center and whatever park area he can create, he puts the property in the name of an entity that will be bound by law to turn it over to the homeowners. I think that's the best we can expect, and I would beg you to give us that relief. Thank you.
I'm going to address a few issues. I'm not going to address hearsay, because that's what it is. It's hearsay. It's not here. What you have before you tonight are two applications. As I indicated before, we have a fully conforming subdivision application. The developer's agreement, the prior resolutions, none of them talk about using the word the entire Lot 9. It talks about, what it does say is a 10,000 square foot community center. Should you vote favorably on the subdivision, we have a fully conforming site plan application with a 10,000 square foot community center. We have recreation area. We have more parking than is required by the ordinance. We are additionally paving 2 brand new streets. We're including curbing, sidewalks, and I think it was approximately 40 parking spaces. I know those are off-site. They don't exist today. And if someone doesn't do it, no one's going to come along and do this right now, especially if the synagogue, if this property goes up, it's never going to happen. We're here, we're creating 2 new streets and all of that. With regard to Mr. Jackson's question about how the association is going to work, my thought process on this is, and this is worked on some other developments in town where there are 2 separate developments that have separate associations that they then work together to have one community center. You end up having associations for that center. The reason you need that is because you have, like I said, you have different developments that have different issues and different criteria, and I can't tell you right now if the development on 472 or the development on block 461 are going to be an association as well. I don't recall, but if they are, those associations would have access then into this master association. I understand Mr. Jackson is looking for bylaws that give some protection rights, and again, we've indicated, we understand. We're here, the resolution talks about they're going to have 1/150th, that's in the resolution. Now, as far as which 1/50th, my only question is, 2 resolutions talk about which 2 developments are going to have. We know 472 is part of it, 461 is a part of it. We know that if it's approved, these 2 duplexes, 4 units, are going to be a part of it. We're not arguing that. The number was picked at 1/150th, so we will have to figure out which other developments have access into this association. I don't have that answer for you because, I'll be honest with you, those resolutions don't talk about it. Yep.
This entity that you're setting up, and whoever belongs to it, are they each entitled to 1 share, or the entire entity is entitled to 1 share of the 150?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I believe it was the idea would be the house, each individual unit number. Yeah, that is my understanding. I'm not talking about, Mr. Fulmer, are you talking about if this is going to be 1/150th, this will be 1/150th? That's not what I was indicating. I was indicating, again, I understand, each house that's going to be part of it, have a block lot number, is going to be another 1/150th, and it'll be a share, and they'll have to pay their dues, just like every other synagogue has, or community center has, where you're a member.
More than 150 or less than?
I believe it was, again, I don't know if it was promised to more than these 40, I can't answer that, I don't know the answer, but I will tell you that it's not gonna be more than it's not gonna be more than 150, only because the board, again, came up with, went from, okay, 110, let's round it up to 1/150th. I don't know, I can't answer as to what the board's thought process was in creating it, but we're not fighting it. We are in agreement with everything that the resolution is saying. There'll be no more than 1/150th that'll be able to buy in to be members of this synagogue, community center.
Because we have, you sell 40, you only have 40 are subject to it, the other 60% belongs to.
I can only work with the resolutions that I have. Again, as our, I'm sorry.
The other units that have been built in the area, block 462, 473, they'll all be that other 110 units.
Yeah, how many units do you have? You have less than?
There were 110 at the time 461 was done. And that's why the first number of 110 came up. And then Mr. Schmuckler said, well, let's make it 150 because we know there'll be a few more in the area.
Is there an intent that the 150 shareholders or interest holders will be right from that neighborhood?
Yes.
Okay, so you're not going...
No, we're not getting anybody from Brooklyn or from Brookhill or...
from the other side of town.
Right.
So how do you know, I guess the shares to the people, the 40 will go with those properties. They're already vested.
That's
It's in the resolution, we're not going to argue.
How do you pay, how, the other, if it's 40, that's another 110 if you use 150 number. How do those other 110 households buy in?
Well, they all buy in for a nominal fee. The 10,000 escrow that's put in is not...
The buy-in fee.
It's not a buy-in fee. The 10,000 escrow is to make sure
Yeah,
that
make sure it gets built.
MNYK builds it. So you don't need the other people to guarantee that MNYK builds it because if 40 homes all give $10,000 each, he's building. There's an application here tonight
And they
for
give a
sure.
40%
It's going to be built, and it's going to be built before block 461 get any CO. So there's a real hammer on MNYK to get it done.
Imagine that he could have some kind of contractual issue as well if he doesn't.
Well, the other people, he wants them to be in. Nobody wants empty seats in the
So
show.
that's to be determined how the remaining 110 was cast out. But you would agree to have protection for the minority shareholders so that they don't, get voted out, so that they would have a stake in it.
I think it should be done, and Adam's indicated he's done this before. It should be done however it's done other places in Lakewood. And I'm sure if the board acts favorably between your office and Adam's office,
Yeah, I would ask Mr. Liston to come to the table.
Ultimately, Mr. Klugman will not own anything unless
No.
he owns any houses there. That he's
Correct.
not going to sell.
Correct.
And he
Well,
gets the same price
Just to be clear, nobody will be owning this.
Right.
If it's a non-profit, just like any other congregation, there is no owner.
and at some point when there's enough members, it gets handed over to a nonprofit that then takes care of it, and Mr. Klugman is out of the picture.
And the synagogue will change from congregation to different.
Yeah.
Is there a feasibility to this, like, for example, those other 4 units, in order to make this work? It's got to sell off those other 4 lots to, you don't know the answer to that?
Well, is it feasible? Yes. I've been in Lakewood long enough to know that a shul in this location with all the development going on is going to do fine.
I think that was in the question.
Yeah, but the developer is building.
Does it make it easier to build it? Yes, it makes it easier.
He's got to turn it over to people who already have houses. Maybe he contemplated that he was going to take 4 lots out.
We actually had a few more lots. Don't forget, this is the 3rd revision of the application. We came in, I think it was 5.
Lakewood came in with 8 to begin.
Yeah.
I think you testified before, you were looking to get the lot from the township, and the township did not give it, so now the developer has to pay for all of it.
For the park, they don't allow us to build the park.
Right.
And we are giving a recreation area.
So you feel that you fulfill
All the conditions, and it's a full, again, I hate to beat that horse, it's a fully conforming application. I don't like to say this, and you know, we know what happens when we deny a fully conforming application, is that we come back 9 months, a year later, and we have a judge's order. We're trying to work with these homeowners, we're trying to meet the elements of what the resolutions call for. Call for 10,000 square feet, we're giving 10,000 square feet. We have more parking than is required, we're creating new streets, we're creating on-site parking, off-site parking, and I ask that both the subdivision approval be granted, and if so, that the site plan approval be granted as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Mr. Jackson, I'm going to be asking for vote from the board. So we are doing this separately. First, we're asking for the subdivision, then we'll do the site plan. If the subdivision gets approved.
I think as a threshold issue, the board has to determine if this configuration satisfies the intent and the letter of the 2 prior resolutions that have been discussed, as well as the developers at the outset. And that might have been what kind of caused the issue with the subdivision.
I think you'll see that from the vote.
Well, I think we should get a consensus on there. You're the chairman, I don't know how to frame this, but I think you should, have some deliberation on that issue first. You can. I think it'd be better if we did not, because you have to do the first part of the case. Unless, the applicant wants to adjourn it to let Mr. Flansbaum listen to the tapes, and then he can come back and participate fully. But it's a 6-6 vote. There's a quorum, but you have 6 members.
I think I'll ask for a motion.
Okay, it's up to you.
Are we doing both together?
I think the subdivision first.
It's up to you. However you think is an appropriate way to address it.
So then let's go for both. We heard the testimony of. Then anyone would like to make a motion on this application?
Sorry, I'll make a motion to approve the application with everything that was discussed
And the shul will belong to
the association.
or the homeowners. Okay. Do we have a second on this application?
Also, when they're bike racks, I don't know if you recall that.
Everything that was spoken,
Okay.
yes. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion, Mr. Fallon.
Now, is this on both applications?
On both applications.
So you're voting to approve both applications?
We're voting to approve or to deny both applications. That's up to the board. Okay, and we roll call, please.
Mr. Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Hibberson?
No.
Mr. Flansbaum, you're abstaining? Stepping down, thank you. Mr. Herzl?
Yes.
Mr. Fallman?
Yes.
Mr. Graffos?
Yes.
Mr. Garfield?
Thank you.
Okay, motion approved, thank you.
See you in court.
Okay. We have a long agenda, but
And Mr. Liston and Mr. Pfeffer, I'll be in touch with the both of you. I think we should sit down and have a meeting and discuss some of the conditions, and to also come up with a format to make certain that the stakeholders, as contemplated, will have their controlling interest in this community.
Well, I wouldn't want to have such a meeting until I see the resolution and it's adopted.
Well, I think the board's going to want to see what that agreement is before adopting the resolution. So that's what I think, but they don't have to if you don't want to participate. If you don't want to participate.
Oh, no, I'll be happy to participate, but under the circumstances, I first need to consult with my clients about what they would like to see me do next.
Yeah, I'm not saying it has to be tomorrow, but I'd like you to be at the discussions when we come up with a mechanism.
Well, you'll tell me when they are and where they are, and if I can be there, I'll be there.
Okay.
Thanks.
thank you.
Huh?
We hit our limits.
We do have 2 nonprofits on the agenda. One's a synagogue, one's a church. I know the church is up against financial limitations, and it is in addition to an existing church. I would recommend the board consider here the 2 nonprofits.
Are there any variances of the one application, so that should always go?
I believe there's existing variances for the church that need to be reapproved. I don't recall specifically on the synagogue on Ocean Avenue variances.
What numbers do you mind saying? These 12 conditions? You what?
Sure, Ally, read it.
Okay. Mr. Francis, can you stay for the next code?
I just, yeah, I didn't know.
1 second, please stay. Okay, so.
So, we just go character, just like character.
Okay, so let's do some homework here. We
So what do you
carry
think in that?
anything besides number that Ellie you speak, which,
I'm wondering if Mr. Schmuckler's also going to ask us to hear this one minor subdivision that's there.
White Street, possible.
Rather than Sperber?
Mr. Schmuckler,
Oh, Sperber has
I
objected.
can get a 5
Oh,
o'clock.
okay.
I can get a 5 o'clock.
All right, the two nonprofits, and I assume, Mr. Kashuba, are you looking to be heard on Mr. Frankel's application on Ocean Avenue?
I will wait if
I'm
we
just
feel it's
asking if
feasible to
he
get
wants
to there.
Okay.
Limit to these.
All right, so we're going to limit to these two, which is Mr. Frankel, SB 2136, and Latin American Pentecostal, SB 2245. The others are going to be carried to the, the others will be carried to the October 3rd public hearing, this meeting held. You want me to make that announcement? Yep,
I'm sorry, what meeting? I apologize.
October 3rd.
October 3rd.
Members of the public be advised that following applications are being tabled from tonight's agenda and will be carried to the October 3rd, 6 p.m. meeting, this meeting hall. No further notice to be provided. The applications and questions are SD 2188 for Aaron Sperber, SP 2240 for Lakewood Business, SD 2273 for White Street Developers, SD 2175 Yashezko Petrosky, and SD 2279 for Mordecai Eichhorn. I apologize, and also SP 2248 for Aaron Mansour.
So what are you hearing next?
So next we will be hearing SB 2136 for Yehoshua Frankel, followed by SB 2245 for Latin American Pentecostal Church.
Okay. Who's here for number 4?
I am.
Adam, you can do it in 5 minutes.
I can do a lot.
The last one can't be hours.
Not because of me. You just wait for. Don't forget the third one.
I know, thank you. My son just got over it, and now my daughter's getting it. Got it from my son.
Okay.
Today, and I was like, you sound like me. Is it hot? Is that what you said? I thought it was.
Okay, good.
Sorry, you want to read?
On number 4.
You're talking about SP 2136?
Correct.
Okay. Going to our August 16th meeting, under submission waivers first, we have a number identified including topo contour features in 200 feet, EIS, tree protection management, landscaping, and design caps for drainage facilities. We recommend that tree protection management be waived for completeness, but ultimately that we get one if it's approved. Similarly with the landscape plan, we would have to have a landscaping plan per the requirements of the board and Shade Tree Commission. If any comments as a condition of approval, the same with the drainage, the design calculations in the final drainage design.
We have no objection.
We have to vote on the waivers.
Vote on submission waivers.
Do we have a motion to go along with engineer's recommendations on the waivers? Okay, we have a motion, we have a second? We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Any nays? No. So waivers are down.
Good evening. Oh, sorry.
We have variances as well. You have pre-existing variances on minimum lot area and lot width. We believe that there are variances based on our interpretation for rear yard setback for HVAC equipment on the platform, combined yard setback, parking facilities within 5 feet of side property lines, and for perimeter buffer.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Adam Pfefferton, on behalf of the applicant. I'll try and move this along as quickly as possible. I can, well, as quickly long. At this time, if I can swear in Joe Kashuba, our professional.
Testimony before this board with the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. Joseph Kashuba, KBA Engineering Services, Manasquan, New Jersey.
I just want to confirm that Mr. Kashuba has been before the board, is accepted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kashuba, if you can, just walk us through Terry's August 16th letter. I know specifically the zoning section. I believe that some of those variances are no longer required. If I can just ask you to walk us through that.
That's correct.
Go through the variances,
Yeah.
if there's anything you report.
Certainly. We are in the R10 district, where the synagogue is a permitted use as well as residential. We are an undersized lot. We do require those variances. 8,800 square feet where 10,000 is required, as well as 55 feet wide where 75 feet is required. Those are existing conditions that are not being exacerbated. We can indicate that the rear yard setback variance is being eliminated. That was to an HVAC equipment platform. It's not a platform. We'll make it a pad on the ground. Therefore, it's no longer a rear yard setback variance. We do require the variance for minimum combined side yard, 23 feet proposed where 25 feet is required. In this zone, we're required to have 10 feet on each side and a combined of 25. Noting on the layout plan, we are proposing 10 feet on the east side of the building. But as you're aware, and as you can see on the plan, that side backs up to the rear of lots on Waverly Place. So the intent of an ordinance requiring a combined side yard setback is for proper building spacing. The 10-foot setback makes sure that your building's far enough away from your adjacent neighbor. 25 makes sure that all the properties are evenly spaced a little bit further away. In this particular case, we have a 30-foot rear yard setback to the existing houses front down Waverly, which is adjacent to our 10-foot setback, so that the buildings here are spaced 40 feet apart.
So, and just a real quick mark, what Mr. Kashuba is referencing is Exhibit A1, and that is sheet 3 of 4 layout and grading plan.
That is correct. So what we're proposing is a 3-story shul that has a 994 square foot sanctuary on the first floor, and a 5-bedroom rabbi's dwelling above. Reviewing the parking, 2 parking stalls are required for the sanctuary size and 3 parking stalls for the residential, requiring 5 parking stalls. We propose 5 parking stalls on the plan. We've met with DPW, provided a proper trash enclosure. We meet the DOT requirements for desirable typical section, and we've eliminated that rear yard setback variance. So accordingly, we're requesting the variances as noted. Again, we are 23 feet where 25 feet is required. We also require relief for parking setback of 1 feet where 5 feet is required, and a perimeter buffer variance, 20 feet required. We propose 1 foot at the parking, 10 feet at the building. Again, those variances are due to the narrow width of the property. It's a hardship on this property that 75 feet is required in the zone. This lot is only 55 feet wide. It's very narrow, and in order to provide that perimeter buffer or that parking setback would have a substantial impact on the developability of this lot and creates a hardship. We do show a hall in the basement, but we are, that is for Shabbos only. We'll be providing that as a stipulation in the resolution.
No outside service.
No outside simkus. There's a common driveway on the property. The applicant has indicated he will relocate that driveway on the neighbor's property, therefore eliminating the concern about a combined common driveway. Accordingly, the variances can be granted under both the C1 and C2 criteria, and there is no possible detriments to the public good. The building is fully conforming to dimensional requirements except for the combined setback. Will not provide any substantial amount of traffic or noise, and does not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan or the zoning ordinance.
Stuff, your entrances are off Ocean Avenue, right?
That is correct.
There's no off-street parking, on-street parking.
There is no on-street parking in front. We're only 55 feet. 25 feet of that is an aisle.
Any streets right next to that?
Oakland Street is shown on the survey. Actually, Waverly Street is right there. There's a cul-de-sac. It's The survey cited Oakland Street 400 feet down, but 100 feet down is Waverly Street, which is a cul-de-sac. I believe Ally's probably trying to bring up the
It
aerial,
was freezing, I'm sorry, I had to reload.
but there is a residential street one lot away.
What were the rest of the comments?
On Waverly, there's no parking on Waverly. You have all parking places.
Correct, there's duplexes, the parking would be at the cul-de-sac.
Yeah, but there's no, you're not gonna be able to park any other cars in there. The time you get the 4 parking places in front of each unit, you've used up the entire street.
I would say you've used up quite a bit of the street, but I believe there are some.
Take a look at the map, you drew it.
I understand that.
You're not gonna be able to park any cars in. So you don't have any parking there, you have parking a block and a half down on this other street, which is a very narrow street. You don't have any parking.
We are compliant with the ordinance.
Yeah, you may be, if you don't have any parking.
Is this a community school, people in the area?
Just because this is an existing congregation, that's, it's an existing congregation, it's a community, it's a community, sure, for the people just in the area.
So what are we doing? We're just looking at the building?
We're just expanding it, making it a nicer building. And again, we're not,
Where do we park right now?
where does everybody park now? On the existing parking lot.
There's a driveway on the site right now. There's a residential dwelling with a pool in the rear. Actually, it looks like the aerial
Alleys.
has been brought up.
We can now get a better view.
Ocean Avenue is what?
That's where parking is. Yeah, and actually that pool, that'll be demolished, and that's basically more or less going to be the parking area.
The
I'm
building-
sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, the building goes in the back where the pool is, and where the house is now is where the parking
Where the
is.
parking will be.
The house is existing.
It's an existing place now, yes.
Everything's existing.
So again, this is to service the existing people that are there. It's not, they're not building this to have people come not from all other areas. This is existing today, and they're just accommodating themselves a little bit better by giving themselves a little bit more elbow room.
Any questions, any more?
How long is it in, how long is it shul ready?
How long has it been there? Less than half a year, 4 or 5 months.
How many congregants is
Approximately 20.
What's the capacity?
Currently, or where it's, when we change?
Both.
Currently, I think we're at more or less at capacity. There's no more room. And when we expand,
It's not for much.
it's not going to be that much more.
Again,
The sanctuary is 994 square feet for the sanctuary. Yeah, so we're not talking about a large, we're not expecting people to come from other areas. We're not creating a hall that we're looking to rent out to other people. This is people literally living right there are going to come. They're existing coming.
What's the 3-story building?
The third story is I believe the residence.
second and third story of the rabbi's residence.
The second and the third story, right. The first story is just the sanctuary.
Sanctuary, and then the basement.
Yeah.
Correct.
Big floor there?
In the basement, there is one shown on the architecturals, yes.
You have to have a big for 100 square feet, a big for animal.
But again, the whole is to service just this shul. So it's not going to be very big, but you agree, you don't have to worry about having a lot of people come.
Honestly, I don't think we make any risk.
I understand.
Strictly shows.
That's the point. We're not looking.
No cars. Any other questions, any more questions? See no one, welcome to the public. Close it. Anybody like to make, you agree to the rest of the report, you agree to?
The rest of the board, we agree to the, yes.
Correct.
Motion on the second, with the stipulation that there will be no
Franklin. Mr. Hibberson. Mr. Flansbaum has left. Mr. Herzl.
Yes.
Mr. Coleman.
Yes.
Ms. Zagrafos. Mr. Garfield.
No.
Tie, so the motion doesn't pass.
Right.
Right. Does anyone want to make another motion? A tie motion doesn't pass. Why? Is there a different motion that somebody would make that would be acceptable to everyone, a condition or basis for it?
Take out totally.
And usually when someone makes a motion to deny something, they give a basis for it. So if there's a, if it's a denial, I'd like to know in the record.
Mr. Franklin, can we take out the whole nonsense totally?
Make the motion to deny, because there is no place to park in the area. They wouldn't have 4 parking places on site. I know it doesn't call for parking, but lay out that neighborhood, no parking on the area.
Can we add any more parking?
You can't park in the development for trade purposes, because they have all the driveways coming down to the road, no place in between the cars.
They would eliminate the basement, make it go away. I'm asking you a question.
I don't think it would work.
You should.
But that would be his problem. Nobody would show up to it.
Oh, yeah. but-
Where are people going to park?
But there's no problem with it. We approve it.
No, but I'm saying, if you approve it, if they show up, there's no place for them to park. It's not they're going to leave the car in the middle of it.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
What's going to happen on the road, which is the end of the road?
They can't park on there.
I know.
So it's not an option.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, in speaking with the client, if we were to request a rear yard setback and move the building back a little further, we could add in a couple more parking spaces. We would have to ask for that variance. Again,
I believe if we push the building back 9 feet, we can add one more parking stall on this side. It gets very tight to add a second parallel parking stall over here, because DPW is now requiring all schools to have a refuse. We can increase it to 6.
Well, one more stall.
One more stall.
That to change your opinion. I think we'll take a motion. It'll stay.
Well, if there's a motion to approve and it's not, and it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. That's a denial. Some boards will do a separate motion to deny. You don't have to do that. But what my point is, sometimes there's an issue that somebody has that can be resolved that might make a difference, and the board can give some of the relief, all the relief, or none of the relief. My point is, just don't slam the gavel, and that's the end of
I know,
it.
that's my question. If we get rid of the-
Since it is tie, and there's only 6 beds, it's unusual that the board's an odd number board
That's
when
why-
everyone's here.
Mr. Hibberson also,
No, Mr. Hibberson's vote counts, since there's 6 members.
You agree? The line will not. Okay, so regardless of the state
If it stays a tie, that's a denial. And I'll have to prepare the resolution in that manner.
I'm sorry.
If it's a tie, when there's a motion to move the application, it doesn't get the required number of votes, that is a
I
denial.
understand. If I would ask,
Tried to see if there was a way that.
I understand, and I would ask maybe if pose this question. If we were to look at it again and possibly reduce the size of the building, I don't know how many more parking spaces, it will create something, or is, and I guess it's really to Mr. Franklin, he made the motion, and I understand he's concerned about the parking. What number of additional parking spaces make you feel, I'm trying to understand, for our understanding, if there's something we could do to offer to the board?
Not that I know of. Because of the streets that you have down there are already jammed up, and there's no way you're gonna actually people do it. You gotta have enough people to maintain it. What's the money to have the building?
Well, again, this is an existing congregation, that's my point before. These congregants already go there, where it's only going to add a few more congregants from that area.
From that area, and other people aren't.
No, that's the way, no, I understand, just the way that these things work, and I think that was the point of the chairman before. Again, the halls, really nothing, it's a small congregation, they all come from close, but I'm trying to see if there's something I can offer that would make you happy.
it's a new application. If you downsize the building, it's a new application. Am I correct, John?
I'm sorry, I was talking to Mr. Pope.
If they downsize the building and they get more parking, it's a new application.
Yeah, they'll have to make a new application.
Have to make an application. We'll have to base it
They'll
out.
have to take into account, they'll have to come up with a design for something that doesn't have variances or less variances. That-
So I would recommend maybe they come with a preliminary back showing without a full application. Mr. Pfeffer?
I'm sorry, yes.
No, I would recommend maybe you come back with a preliminary, not a full application.
Concept.
And a concept and get the board's feeling on it. If we agree with it, then you go for full application. I
Understood.
don't want you to waste money on it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The last one. Who's on the last one?
SB 2245, Latin American Pentecostal Church. Ms. Padilla is here to introduce.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Evelina Padilla, counsel for Latin American Pentecostal Church.
What's your last name?
Padilla.
Padilla?
Padilla.
Okay.
The church is applying for a second-story addition to an existing building on 2nd Street.
Just 1 second. I want to ask the way we work, we asked the engineer first if he has any comments on his report.
All right, well, what I'm going to talk about, Chairman, is what we normally go
I
through.
think
First,
we announced that this is SB 2245.
we have submission waivers,
Right.
which are identified.
Can you speak into the mic? Can you-
We have submission waivers, which are identified in our review.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? I had a Pentecostal church come into my office that was looking at getting, from Lakewood, that was looking at the land use application. I don't think it was this church. It wasn't you, right?
No.
No, okay, great. Because I remember I asked him about this application, it was a different one.
Oh,
All
for
right, I'm
conflict
sorry for interrupting.
purposes.
I just want to make sure I didn't have a conflict.
Okay.
Let's go through the waivers.
Back to submission waivers. Topo contours, man-made features within 200 feet, EIS, tree protection management, landscape soil erosion, design calculations for drainage. We can support the B waivers based on design information, as well as the EIS since the property is previously developed. We can support tree protection since there's no existing trees on the site, as well as landscaping since the property is virtually impervious in the current condition. Soil erosion sediment control is really subject to the local soil district, and similarly, we're okay with design calculations again, because we have no significant impervious area being added to the project. Therefore, we support the waivers.
Do we have a motion to roll on with the waivers? Offered, do we have a second? Second, all in favor? Aye, any nays, no?
Now,
Okay,
all
waivers
variances,
granted.
all variances include rear yard setback variance for the stairwell, side yard setback, combined side yard setback. We note that residential uses in B2 are exempt from all street parking requirements. I believe that's all that we need. Is that correct, Brian?
Yes.
Thank you, Brian.
I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Jackson.
I'm sorry, you swear from the testimony I give before this board with the truth, the whole truth, and nothing.
I do. Brian Flannery Jackson, New Jersey, licensed professional engineer, professional planner. I have 5 exhibits. A1 shows the site. In blue is the existing building, which we're putting a second story on. There's a stairwell that we're putting in the back. The board probably knows this site on 2nd Street, just east of Lexington. There's a grocery on the corner. There's a school next to us. A2 is the site plan that we submitted, colored in. A3 is the tax map showing where it is. A4 is the aerial. We're near the fire department, the Lakewood Inn, the parking lot in the back. And A5 is the architectural rendering. We're putting a second story on it, which is going to look great. The pink shows where we're asking for a rear yard setback variance for the stairwell. Right now, there's no stairs going up, so we're adding a stairwell. It's 2.6 feet to the parking lot, so it's going to look...
B2 area?
It's a B2, no parking is required. The side yard setback variances are both existing because the building's there. We're just putting a second story on top for Sunday school and occasional use. No catering hall, no simpers. No, and we will comply with all the comments in the report. Master plan encourages development and redevelopment based on smart growth planning, and this is certainly it. It's an inherently beneficial use. It's in the downtown regional. It's an existing use, and we're going to provide, enhancing it to provide Sunday school. It's a C2 variance, and the benefits that way.
Do you have any questions, any more? Seeing no one, welcome to the public. Any public like to be heard? We'll close it to the public. Would anybody like to make a motion on this application?
Make a motion.
Mr. Fowler's motion, and Dave seconds it.
Did I assume the motion's to
The
approve?
motion to approve, yes. Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Franklin. Mr. Hipperson. Mr. Herzl.
Yes.
Mr. Fallman.
Yes.
Mr. Grappos.
Yes.
Mr. Garfield.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I apologize to anybody who didn't get heard tonight. I think the October 3rd is a busy meeting too. Hope everybody show up.
And October 3rd, we will also have the master plan final draft for board's consideration. I assume, but have not verified, October 3rd.
I spoke to Stanley and,
Because should we notice to reopen to the public?
Marty. I spoke to Stan and Marty about the noticing requirements. We do have to notice for it, and they have to get the plans on file with the county, et cetera, state planning, and they expect to get it all done Friday. I presume I can get the notice to the paper tomorrow. Not to the paper tomorrow, but in the paper for Friday, and then we'll be okay, so.
If not, I'll take the next meeting.
Right.
October 3rd is a heavy meeting. I don't know, we should all push it.
On October 3rd, do we need to reopen for public, or was that already
If there's anything
closed?
else,
Well, yeah, someone who theoretically gets the notice and goes and looks at the thing, the comments, the different, I think you could limit the comments to what the changes were.
Mr. Jackson, if I open to the public and it's full like that,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna listen to anything. We
Well,
just
they
do a
would-
lot of things, not to public forum.
I
So
know
should
that
we
the
make it-
committee is anxious to get this done, so to comply with some kind of state planning regulations,
I just want to be fair.
designation.
I want to be fair to all the applicants and push for my team.
Well, I would suggest you put the master plan thing, I'll put it last on the agenda
And when we,
and deal with it at that point.
Still may not reach it.
Ally,
won't get hurt.
Well, you could,
You can get paid overtime.
I just wanted, maybe we can have.
You have to say
Stan and
one
Marty
person in advance.
put together a fact sheet of what the changes are so that we can make sure that we stick to that agenda when we have the master plan.
Email the board.
Well, like, at least have it, have something here that we can give to the public with a
About the
sheet,
master
just like
plan?
kind of focusing if there were any changes between the draft version we got and the final version, so that anybody that does come, we can make sure we focus.
That's true. T&M should probably provide a summary of those changes anyway, just like
Right.
your
Next meeting.
review.
The next meeting and go to the next.
Yeah, they indicated they were hoping to have the revised plan to me by the end of the month, end of the week, which would be 10 days later. So hopefully they can provide a summary with that.
What do you recommend, Mr. Jackson?
We announced for the 3rd, if,
There's no notice, because you said you were going to give notice.
well, I have to put the notice in the paper, but we made the announcement for the
There's
3rd.
another question, Mr. Jackson. The 3rd, I think, is the day before service. I don't know, Mr. Fallon, are you available, Mr. Franco? I don't know who will come. Oh, Mr. Henderson's not, he can't vote on it anyways, on the master plan, unless he listens.
Unless
to
he
the
wants
tape.
to listen to about 12 hours.
Okay.
That would be an awful punishment.
It's master plan, I'm gonna be here.
You'll be here the 3rd. And they be here, Angela, you can be here?
Yes.
And Mr. Franklin, you can be here the 3rd? Okay, yeah. I'll try to, we have a quorum, so then we should just leave it for the 3rd? Okay, and put it on the end of the
And
day?
you want it at the end?
I don't know what's fair, I don't know what's fair.
I don't know.
I don't know, we just tabled a bunch of things today.
Because that could actually theoretically go on forever.
Yeah.
I think that we hear the applications first, which are more difficult, that we're more likely to get through them.
To the opposition, any of the applications that are coming,
Yes.
And how many applications do we have? You scheduled originally for the October 3rd, and now we tabled some. So what do you have total?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Okay, good. Wishful thinking. And is there any opposition with the attorneys on that?
There is on at least the one minor that's over by Harrogate. We have Pedro's application over on Goods Road. Remember, he came in for school, and the neighbors didn't want a school, now he wants 5 lots. I don't know if that sounds familiar or not. That may be the only ones with conflicts,
Alan, when is the 10-day deadline
and I 10-day deadline for what?
for giving out the notices?
Master plan, Friday.
10 days before Tuesday the 3rd, which is
Friday.
Friday the 22nd.
Yeah, I can't talk to you, it's Rosh Hashanah this week. Right, I can't even talk to you if we hear anything.
Mr. Chairman, you had 2 administrative minor subdivisions that are completely conforming on the end of the agenda.
Oh, yeah.
I know, I would have mentioned them, but I know it's late, so I'm carrying them.
Well, there's no variances, there's no,
Next week, because the agenda 2 weeks from now is going to be just as bad.
It's like 20.
I want to stay here.
Somebody check out Lily.
There were some bills and minutes, so.
Okay, motion to pay, we have a motion to pay the bills? Okay, move second, all in favor? Aye. Any nays? No. Okay, good night, there's no, anything else, right?
Public.
Oh, I have to talk to the public, right. Anyone from the public like to be heard?
Mr. Klein, are you okay? No, I knew something was going on. It's either that or you were dead.
You must be coming Rosh Hashanah for that. Thank you, good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
How come you guys